That first night, I heard a sound that made my stomach tighten. I was standing in the living room of this old family summer house, staring out at the black sky. It was pitch dark outside, and the walls around me were mostly glass. I felt exposed. I heard a small cracking noise coming from somewhere near the far corner of the window. I froze, listening. It was faint, like someone was lightly tapping with a fingernail. I could almost feel my pulse in my ears. I walked over to check the spot, but the sound stopped. I looked into the glass and saw my own face. Then something shifted in the reflection. It happened so fast that I thought I imagined it. My reflection seemed to smile at me, even though my mouth was set in a straight line. I blinked hard and told myself I was tired. I arrived here earlier that day. I'm an architect. I don't have a big team or anything like that. I work mostly alone, so I figured I could spend a few weeks here, going over some plans for a renovation project I've been juggling. This house belongs to my family, though no one has used it much in the past decade. It's a bit run down, lots of dust, old furniture, and a slight musty smell. The walls are mostly glass panels from floor to ceiling, especially in the living room and part of the kitchen. It was built with this panoramic view in mind, so you can see the valley and the thin line of trees below. But at night, those windows just become big dark mirrors. Before I even unpacked, I checked the windows for leaks or cracks. They seemed fine. The frames felt sturdy and the glass looked thick enough to hold up against storms. I didn't see any moisture or obvious damage. The only thing that bothered me was how many smudges and smears they had. I could tell no one had cleaned them in a while. I found an old box of cleaning supplies in the hall closet and spent a couple of hours wiping them down. At sunset, the living room looked almost glossy, with clean glass reflecting the orange and red sky. It felt strange to see the sunset in every direction, like I was inside a bubble. After dinner, I sat down on the old couch. I had a single lamp turned on. The rest of the house was dark. I was thinking about some design sketches for an upcoming project when I heard the first series of soft clicks. They came from different parts of the windows. I turned off the lamp and listened. My heart was beating fast, and I could feel it prickling at the back of my neck. I walked slowly toward the nearest window and pressed my ear against the glass. It felt cold, and I heard nothing else. Then I turned around to go back, and I thought I saw movement outside. Just a shape passing by. I waited, squinting, but everything looked empty. I forced myself to shrug it off and went to bed. I didn't sleep well. The next day, I woke up early and checked all the windows again. I noticed a few fine lines on one of the panels near the east corner. They looked like cracks, but they didn't go all the way through. They felt more like surface scratches. I ran my fingertip over them. They weren't there the day before. I tested the spot with my knuckle, lightly tapping. The glass felt solid, so I decided not to worry about it. I went about my day organizing my papers, setting up my laptop on the large wooden dining table, and making coffee. That night, I heard the noises again. They came at random intervals. Sometimes they were faint clicks. Other times they sounded like a knuckle rap or a sharp tap. It felt like someone was outside knocking. But whenever I looked, I saw nothing except my own reflection or the darkness beyond the glass. I started to get uneasy. My chest felt tight whenever the noise happened. I tried to distract myself by turning on the TV. That worked for a while, but around midnight, I heard a long scraping sound. It made all the hairs on my arms stand up. I muted the TV and listened. The scraping stopped. I jumped up from the couch, grabbed a flashlight, and walked along the entire perimeter of the living room. I shined the light through the glass, searching the yard. There was no one there. No footprints in the mud, no animals moving around. Just a still night and a bit of wind. When I turned off the flashlight, I caught a glimpse of something in the window. I saw a face looking back at me, but the expression wasn't mine. It had wide eyes and a tense jaw, almost like it was angry or afraid. I flipped the flashlight back on, shining it on the glass. The face vanished. There was just me, startled. I stepped back, breathing heavily. I wiped sweat off my forehead and tried to calm down. I decided to go to bed. I didn't want to stand there like a fool, staring at my own reflection. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated. During the day, everything felt normal. The house looked old but peaceful. I spent most of my time reviewing my architectural plans, making phone calls, and sending emails when the internet connection cooperated. In the evenings, I cooked simple meals and tried to relax. But once it got late, the noises returned. Sometimes they were just tiny clicks or taps. Other times they were louder, like short bursts of rapping. My frustration grew. I started pacing around at night, flicking lights on and off, hoping to catch whoever was messing with me. But I never saw anyone. I checked the doors and windows, locked everything, and even dragged an old chair in front of the sliding door as a kind of makeshift security measure. I told myself it was probably the wind or changes in temperature affecting the glass. On the sixth night, I noticed something disturbing. I was brushing my teeth in the hallway bathroom when I heard a light knocking sound. It seemed to come from the living room. I spat out the toothpaste, rinsed my mouth, and hurried over. All the lights were off in there, so I stood at the entrance, letting my eyes adjust. The glass windows faced out into total blackness. I waited, holding my breath. Then I saw a reflection at the far side of one large panel. It looked like me, but the reflection's head was tilted at an odd angle. I raised my left arm, and the reflection didn't move its arm. I raised my right arm, and it raised its left. My stomach churned. I took a step forward, and it took a step back, but not in a mirrored way. It was more like it was dodging me. I felt sweat gathering on my forehead and under my arms. My breathing got heavier. I moved closer to the glass, trying not to blink. The reflection's face stared back at me, but it wasn't copying my expression. It looked tense, with furrowed brows. My face felt neutral, just scared. My legs were shaky. I tried to reach out and touch the glass, but I hesitated. In that moment, the reflection's hand rose to the glass before mine did. I yanked my hand back. Then the reflection slowly lowered its hand, like it was mocking me. I ran for the light switch and flipped it on, flooding the room with light. The reflection was gone. There was just me, panting, with my eyes wide. I couldn't believe what I just saw. The next morning, I spent hours looking for any plausible explanation. I considered the possibility of some trick of the light or a double reflection from the other side of the room. I tried to replicate it by moving around, adjusting the blinds, and tilting lamps. Nothing came close to what I saw. My nerves were shot. I kept glancing at the windows, dreading nightfall. I even thought about leaving early, but I had a deadline for the renovation project, and I thought maybe I was imagining things because of stress. That evening, I sat in the living room with all the curtains closed. I tried to ignore the faint noises outside. I put on some music. Around 11, the lights flickered. I realized the power might be unstable in this old place. I got up, and as I did, I heard several loud pops from the glass. It sounded like someone cracking their knuckles one after another. My heart started racing. I raced to the breaker box in the hallway, but everything looked normal. Then, the lights in the living room went off completely. I stood in the hall, listening in the dark. My chest felt tight. My breathing got ragged. I reached for my phone to use it as a flashlight. The battery was at 5%. I hurried back into the living room, swiping my phone's light around. The beams landed on the glass panels, and I saw what looked like thin, branching cracks. They formed near the edges first, then spread inward. I heard a few more pops, but they were almost soft. It didn't make sense that the glass would break so quietly. Yet I watched as lines crawled across the surface like they were being drawn by an invisible hand. My hands shook, and my pulse pounded. My skin tingled, and the back of my neck felt ice cold. I tried to get closer to see if something had hit the windows, but there was no impact point. The cracks just formed on their own. They made shapes that looked like outlines of faces or weird symbols. It was hard to tell in the dim phone light, but I could see distinct curves that resembled shoulders or maybe letters. I felt a sudden wave of panic. I thought the entire window might shatter. I backed away, not wanting glass to slice me. Then I realized it wasn't falling apart. The cracks just stayed, branching out in silence. My mouth went dry. I couldn't tear my eyes away from those lines. They formed patterns that reminded me of silhouettes or some kind of writing. I stepped closer again, carefully, and moved my phone to see better. My reflection in the broken glass seemed to have a twisted grin, but my own lips were pressed together. I reached out and the reflection's hand seemed to come forward too, but not at the same time. When my fingertips touched the surface, it felt normal, just a roughness where the cracks spread. My phone's battery died at that moment, leaving me in total darkness. I felt dread rising in my chest. I couldn't see the cracks, but I knew they were there. I groped around for the table lamp and found the switch. The light flickered and then came on, dim and unsteady. I saw the cracks again, shining in the lamp's glow. They covered large sections of the windows. The lines looked random, but when I stared at them long enough, I saw shapes that might have been words. My head started pounding. I wanted to get out of that room. I took a few steps back, stumbled over a rug, and fell onto the couch. My arms felt weak, and my hands trembled. My breath was coming in short, fast bursts. For a moment, I thought about driving away, but I couldn't move. I stared at the cracked windows, waiting for them to collapse or something else to happen. Nothing did. The house was quiet except for the sound of my breathing. Eventually, I forced myself to get up. I gathered the few belongings I had scattered around and brought them into the hallway. I left the lamp on in the living room because I didn't want to be in complete darkness. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed trying to calm down. I kept seeing that reflection, the one that didn't move like me. I lay awake for hours listening to every small creak in the house. I didn't hear more cracking sounds, but I felt like the windows were watching me. I could picture those branching lines, forming weird shapes and outlines. It made my stomach clench. At some point, I passed out from exhaustion. When I woke up in the morning, I went straight to the living room with the sunlight at my back. I was half expecting to see the entire glass shattered on the floor, but the windows were still intact. The cracks were there, though. In the daylight, they looked even more bizarre. They snaked across the glass in patterns that didn't seem natural. Some lines looked like arcs that met at points, almost making sections that resembled a human profile. Other lines appeared to form crooked letters, but I couldn't read any real words. My eyes felt dry from staring at them. The house was silent. I walked outside onto the small deck to see if the cracks were visible from the exterior. They were. The lines were the same, but they looked less sharp from that side. I tapped the glass with my knuckle. Solid. No holes. I felt uneasy standing out there, so I went back inside. I made coffee and forced myself to drink it, even though my throat felt tight. I looked around the living room, at the furniture and the high ceiling. I checked the other rooms to see if any other windows had cracked. They hadn't, only those big panels in the living room. I spent a couple of hours packing up my work stuff and loading it into my car just to be safe. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see a face or a shadow. Around midday, I walked over and examined the cracks again. They looked the same as before. No new lines. That's when I noticed my reflection in the glass. It was faint because of the sunlight, but I could still see my face. I stood still. I watched it carefully. My reflection didn't do anything unusual. It moved with me, turning its head when I did, blinking when I blinked. I felt a huge wave of relief. Maybe everything had run its course. Maybe the cracks were just a freak structural thing. Or maybe they'd been there, hidden, for years. Then as I was leaning in to examine one branch of the crack, the reflection's expression changed a fraction of a second before mine. I saw its mouth twist into a frown. Then I felt my face do the same. My arms started shaking. I backed away. I didn't want to watch it anymore. I picked up a blanket from the couch and threw it over that section of the window. I didn't have the nerve to keep looking. My body felt hot and cold at the same time. My heart pounded like I'd just run a mile. Right now I'm in the small study, finishing up some last bits of work on my laptop. The living room is just down the hall, but I closed the door. I can still feel the presence of that cracked glass. I keep expecting to hear those taps and scraping sounds again tonight. My plan is to leave first thing in the morning. I want to call someone to fix the glass or at least board it up. I don't care about the cost. I'm not staying another night in this place with those reflections and those cracks. I'm telling you all this because I need to get it out of my head. I can't shake the feeling that something watches me from that glass. I can't prove it. I can't explain it. But I saw my reflection move on its own, and I heard cracks form in total silence. I don't want to stay here long enough to find out if there's more. I need to get away, and I'm doing that in the morning. That's the end of it. I never expected that a simple assignment about local legends would turn into one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. I'm a journalist with a background in investigative reporting, and I came to this mountainous area because I heard rumors about a strange figure who appears in thick fog. Locals said he wears black clothes and leaves footprints long after he disappears from sight. I found that intriguing enough to pack my gear and head straight here. Now I'm sitting at a small wooden table in a rented cabin, my hands shaking every time I remember what happened on that trail. I want to share it all, as plainly as possible, so no one thinks I'm making up wild stories. This is exactly what I saw, what I felt, and what I did. I won't add any fancy words or ideas. I'll just tell it how it happened. When I arrived in the nearest town, it was late afternoon. The sun was hidden behind heavy clouds, and the air felt dense. I could smell damp earth around me. The road leading to the mountain looked rough, filled with uneven patches of gravel. Locals approached me with cautious curiosity. They were polite but distant. I told them I was investigating an old legend. Some of them nodded, but they didn't say much. One older man warned me that once I saw the figure in black, I might regret coming here at all. I didn't press him for details. I just smiled, thanked him for his time, and continued gathering background information. After buying a few supplies, a thermos, a flashlight, and extra batteries, I made my way to a cabin I'd rented for a week. The owner was a middle-aged man who handed me the key, reminded me to watch my step on the trails, and then left in a hurry. He didn't look me in the eye. That made me uneasy, but I shrugged it off. Journalists deal with nervous residents all the time. I spent the evening organizing my notes, labeling my audio recorder, and checking the maps I'd found online. The region was large, with plenty of hidden paths. I decided to start with a well-known trail the next morning. The following day, I woke up before sunrise. I felt a chill in the room even though I'd set the heater to a comfortable level. My breath came out in faint wisps when I walked to the window. A dense fog pressed against the glass. I grabbed my jacket, laced up my boots, and stepped outside. The cold bit at my cheeks. My eyes watered for a few seconds as I adjusted to the sharp air. The trailhead was about a half-mile from the cabin, and the mist didn't let me see more than a few yards ahead. I walked slowly, pausing to listen. I expected to hear birds or maybe small animals in the bushes. Instead, the silence was intense. My boots crunched the gravel, and that was all I heard. Every few steps I stopped to look around. I saw trees looming like tall silhouettes. I noticed some old wooden signs pointing to different parts of the mountain. Once I found the sign marking the trail I wanted, I took a deep breath and moved forward. The path was narrow, bordered by tall pines. Occasionally, a sharp wind blew, stirring the branches overhead. I smelled wet pine needles on the ground. My flashlight cut through the fog in a weak beam. Visibility was poor, but I kept going. After about an hour, I felt the air shift. The temperature dropped even more, and the fog thickened until I could barely see my own feet. That was when I thought I saw a figure in the distance. He wore black from head to toe. He was taller than me, but I couldn't make out his face. I tried calling out a greeting. My voice echoed, then faded. The figure didn't respond. I kept walking, expecting to find him on the path. He was only a short distance ahead, but when I reached the spot, there was no one there. The space was empty. The fog hovered around me like a white shroud, and I couldn't see more than a few steps in front. My heart pounded. I spun around, thinking maybe he had stepped off the trail. No sign of him. But the strangest part was that I saw footprints. They were fresh, pressed into the damp ground, leading forward. I crouched down. They looked like standard boot prints, maybe a size bigger than mine. They continued straight down the trail as if someone was still walking. Yet I saw no one ahead. I reached out my hand to touch one of the prints. The dirt felt cold and muddy. The impression was deep, which meant whoever made it was heavier than me or had put a lot of pressure on each step. The footprints kept appearing, one after another, about a yard apart. It looked like the stride of a single person moving at a regular pace, but there was nobody to attach those prints to. Despite the chill in my spine, I decided to follow them. I wanted to see how far they went. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe the fog was playing tricks on my vision. As I moved, each step made me more anxious. The silence around me grew more suffocating. I started hearing the rush of blood in my ears. My palms felt sweaty inside my gloves. At some point, I realized my breathing had become fast and shallow, so I forced myself to inhale deeply. I didn't want to lose my composure. About 20 minutes later, I saw something shiny on the ground, next to a new footprint. When I bent down, I realized it was a broken piece of mirror. It reflected my eyes in a distorted way. The edges were sharp, so I wrapped it in a piece of cloth and put it in my jacket pocket. A few feet ahead, there was another piece of mirror, a bit smaller. Then after a few more steps, I found a page torn from a diary. The words on it were illegible. It looked like scribbles or frantic pen marks. I rubbed my thumb across the lines, but I couldn't make out any clear sentences. The paper felt damp and thin. I checked the back, and it was blank except for a faint watermark. I stuffed it in my pocket, too. The footprints never stopped. They just kept going in a straight line. Every so often, I'd find another piece of mirror or another page. One page had some drawings on it, patterns that looked like random curves and circles, but nothing I recognized. Every time I picked something up, I felt a prickly sensation on the back of my neck. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone behind me. Nobody was there. Soon the sensation of being watched became overwhelming. My stomach felt tight. My chest hurt from shallow breathing. I forced myself to stop and drink some water from my thermos. The water tasted stale, probably because I'd left it in the thermos all night. My throat was so dry that I barely cared. After gulping it down, I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm my nerves. I heard a soft crunch behind me. It sounded like a footstep on wet leaves. When I spun around, I saw nothing. I aimed my flashlight in every direction. Fog swallowed the beam. I cursed under my breath and decided to keep moving forward, staying on the trail, following the footprints. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Even the wind seemed to die down. My footsteps felt louder than usual, like I was in a closed room. My heart thumped so hard that my chest felt tight. Then I heard another step, distinctly different from mine, coming from behind. I froze, turning quickly. That was when I saw him again. The man in black stood about 20 feet away, his back partially turned toward me. His coat looked worn, like it had been through rough weather. His shoulders were broad, his posture stiff. I yelled, "Hey, who are you?" But he didn't respond. He started to fade into the mist, not running, just disappearing. And then he was gone. I blinked hard. My face felt hot. My hands started trembling. I stood there trying to steady my breathing. As soon as my pulse slowed, I walked to where he had been standing. The footprints in that area were fresh, as if he had just stood there. I wiped sweat off my forehead with my sleeve. Everything felt wrong. My instinct told me I should turn back, but my curiosity wouldn't let me. I told myself I'd walk another 10 or 15 minutes, then return to the cabin. I wanted some proof that I wasn't just imagining things. So I pressed on. Within a few more minutes, the fog got thicker. My flashlight became almost useless. I could feel droplets of moisture clinging to my eyelashes. The path under my feet grew softer, and I had to watch my step to avoid sinking into muddy patches. My jacket got heavy with moisture. I could smell the wet fabric. The footprints were still there, continuing in front of me. At one point, the trail curved, and the footprints curved with it. That meant it wasn't just some static phenomenon. Someone or something was definitely making them. I felt a surge of fear in my gut. It clenched like a fist in my abdomen. Then I heard footsteps behind me again, several at once, too close for comfort. It sounded like someone was rushing up. I spun around so fast that my shoulder cracked. No one was there, but I still heard the crunching sound of feet on wet ground. My pulse raced, and my mouth went dry. The noise circled around me for a few seconds, like invisible bodies marching in every direction. My mind started to spin with questions. I kept turning, trying to see if there was a hidden source of the noise. I saw only fog and trees. Finally, the footsteps stopped. I was left in silence again, except for the pounding in my ears. I wanted to run, but part of me was too scared to make any sudden moves. I took small steps backward, facing the direction I'd come from. Then I heard a single step behind me. Just one. It was loud and deliberate. My muscles tightened. The hair on my arms stood up. I clenched my fists, then slowly turned. That was when I saw him closer this time. The same man in black. He had no visible face. The darkness around his features felt impossible, like a void. He raised his arm slightly as if reaching out. I heard my own teeth chattering. My throat closed up and I couldn't speak. I took a shaky step backward, and he advanced without a sound. I noticed something on the ground at his feet, the same type of mirror shards I'd seen earlier scattered around his boots. I couldn't see his eyes, but I felt like he was staring straight at me. My mind screamed at me to leave. I fumbled for my flashlight, shining it right at him. The beam hit his chest. Then, in an instant, he dissolved into the fog. It was like he vanished into thin air. I stood there, gasping. My heart was beating so hard I thought I'd pass out. I could still see fresh footprints on the ground as if he'd just made them seconds ago. But I saw no sign of him. I moved away, following the trail back the way I had come. My boots slid on wet leaves and mud. I stumbled a few times, catching myself on tree trunks. Every so often I stopped to look over my shoulder. I saw no one. My hand shook so badly that I dropped my flashlight. It rolled on the ground, flickering. I grabbed it and forced myself to keep walking. By the time I reached a familiar section of the trail, the fog started to lift slightly. I recognized the wooden sign that pointed back to the main road. The footprints still showed up here and there, but they looked fainter. I quickened my pace until I reached a small clearing near a rocky outcrop. I saw my cabin in the distance. The roof was partially visible through the thinning mist. I felt such relief that I nearly collapsed. I forced my legs to move until I was inside, locking the door behind me. Now I'm sitting at the table, writing this down while everything is still fresh. My hands are steadier, but I keep glancing at the windows, expecting to see a dark shape moving in the fog. I haven't found any logical explanation for what I experienced. I still have those mirror shards and those diary pages with scribbles. They're on the table right now, next to my flashlight. They feel cold to the touch, and they remind me that everything I saw was real. I'm supposed to stay here for a week, but I'm already thinking about leaving early. My assignment was to investigate local legends, and I think I've found more than enough. I have no intention of going back on that trail. I'll write my article, describe the footprints, the figure, and the strange objects. That's all I can do. I don't know what's behind that phenomenon, and I don't plan to risk my sanity any further. All I know is that when I followed those footprints through the fog, I sensed something watching me, something not visible to the naked eye. And for a few terrifying moments, it stood right in front of me before fading into the mist. I'm not sure how people will react to this story. Some will laugh, call it fantasy, or accuse me of seeking attention. Maybe others will say they've seen something similar. Either way, this is what happened. I don't feel safe anymore. The memory of those footprints appearing in the mud without a visible person making them sends a jolt through my chest every time I think about it. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something might be lurking just outside my window. So I'll finish this account and hope it's enough for anyone who wants to know the truth. This isn't folklore. It isn't a made-up ghost tale. It's what I experienced step by step out there in the fog, chasing a man in black who left footprints behind, even when he couldn't be seen. need to get something off my chest. I've been building marionettes for years, and I've always felt confident in my skills. My tools are simple, my workspace is cramped, but I take pride in the details. I pay attention to every joint, every piece of thread, every bit of paint. I never thought I'd see one of my creations move on its own. Yet here I am, trying to explain this to you in the most direct way I can. There's no flashy story here. I just want to lay out what happened. I run a small workshop in my garage. It's attached to the back of my house where I store blocks of wood, boxes of wires, and random hinges. I have a solid wooden table, a few stools, and a set of lights that I installed myself. Most days I work on custom marionettes for local collectors. Sometimes I build them for small theater groups. I don't consider myself famous, but I do get regular orders. A couple of months ago, I felt a spark of inspiration. I wanted to try something more ambitious. I decided to build a marionette that would have realistic movement without needing so many visible wires. I thought it would be a nice challenge. I planned out the body design. I measured the angles for the elbows, knees, wrists, ankles. I spent hours carving the face, making sure the mouth was just right. I wanted it to open and close smoothly. I worked on the eyes, placing them carefully in the sockets, giving them a slight shine. The arms had hidden ball joints I'd never tried before. The legs had a new system that let them bend in a more natural way. I felt proud, even a bit excited to show it off when it was ready. One night, after finishing the assembly, I stayed in the workshop later than usual. I was smoothing down rough edges and testing how the limbs moved. The puppet looked almost lifelike. I could rotate the wrist, and it would swing in a gentle arc. I could bend the knee and it wouldn't catch or stick. I added subtle paint to the face to highlight the cheekbones and jaw. When I stood the puppet up on the table and held the strings, it seemed to stare straight ahead, like it was waiting for me to give it purpose. I left it there, propped against a wooden support, and went inside to get some sleep. The next morning I came back intending to put it away. That's when I noticed something odd. It was no longer facing forward. The head was tilted. The arms, which I had set neatly at its sides, were now slightly raised. The left hand was turned like it had started to reach for something. I thought I must have bumped the table. Or maybe I had left it that way by accident. I didn't think too hard about it. I repositioned the puppet, returned it to a neutral stance, and moved on with my day. Several days went by. I kept tinkering with other projects. A friend had asked for a simple marionette for a local festival. I was busy cutting wood and sanding. My special puppet remained in the corner, almost like a display piece. One morning I walked in and found it lying on the floor. The strings that connected to its shoulders were tangled. The head was turned to the side, facing the door. My immediate reaction was annoyance. I figured the puppet had slipped off the stand. Maybe I'd left it too close to the edge. Still, it bothered me a bit because I'm usually careful. But I picked it up, checked for damage, and then placed it against the wall again. I didn't think about it much after that. Life kept me busy. Eventually, a week or so later, I got another unusual surprise. I came home late from running errands. It was about 9 in the evening. I walked into the workshop to check on my ongoing projects. The special puppet wasn't in the corner. My heart thumped for a second. I looked around. I saw it on my workbench facing the door with its arms raised like it was greeting me. I remember I froze for a good 5 seconds just standing there. My gut twisted. I'm not the type to panic easily, but that moment left me confused. I didn't remember moving it there. I had no reason to place it on the workbench. No one else had access to my shop. I asked myself if maybe I was losing track of things. Maybe I was just tired. Still, it didn't sit right with me. I decided to ignore my uneasy feeling. I picked up the puppet, stared into its eyes, and almost spoke to it, but stopped myself. I brushed off the dust on its arms. I set it down on a small stool with its legs bent, as if it were just sitting there. Then I left, locking the shop. I remember my hands trembling a bit, but I tried to convince myself that I was just overthinking. That's what I do sometimes when I'm stressed. The next morning, I came out to the shop. When I opened the door, the puppet wasn't on the stool. It stood in the middle of the floor, leaning slightly toward the doorway. The toes were angled in a weird stance, like it had tried to walk. My throat went dry. I carefully approached it, as if expecting it to jump at me. But it was just a puppet, made of wood and metal joints. I reached out, touched its arm, and felt the smooth polish. It was solid. It didn't move. The workshop was quiet, except for the hum of the overhead light. I had this deep urge to run, but I forced myself to stay. My heart pounded and my palms were sweaty. After a moment, I grabbed the puppet around the waist and placed it back on a table. I inspected all the joints to see if something had broken or come loose. Everything looked fine. I pushed away my fear, took a deep breath, and decided to keep it locked in a cabinet that night. I spent that day focusing on other tasks, cutting more pieces for the festival order, responding to messages from a local theater. I tried not to think about the puppet, but later that afternoon, I heard a faint thud from inside the cabinet. I froze in place. The cabinet is an old metal unit near the far wall. I remember feeling my heart race. My legs felt heavy. I set down my wood carving knife and waited. For a few seconds, I just listened. Nothing. I walked to the cabinet, tugged the handle, and peered inside. The puppet was exactly where I'd left it, but it was facing the back, like it had turned around. The arms were stretched out to the sides. There was a faint scratch on the inside wall of the cabinet. I got goosebumps all over my neck. I closed it and locked it again. That night, I didn't sleep well. Around midnight, I decided to get up. I couldn't stop thinking about the puppet, about the possibility that I was imagining things. I walked down the hall to the workshop door. I cracked it open and peeked inside. I saw only my tools and the shelves in the dim light. I turned on the overhead light and stepped in. The cabinet was still shut. I was about to walk back out when I heard a soft creak. It came from the cabinet. I took a few steps forward, my heart thumping hard, and unlocked it. The puppet sat there, arms at its sides, head slightly bowed. No movement. I felt stupid for standing there like a scared animal. I slammed the cabinet shut, locked it, and left. The following morning, I found the cabinet wide open. The lock was on the floor. The door was swinging softly. The puppet wasn't inside. I started sweating right away. I looked around the shop. I found it lying on my desk by the far wall. It was on its back, arms and legs splayed, head turned toward my chair. I felt a jolt of anger mixed with fear. There was no way it could have unlocked the cabinet. But there it was. I picked up the puppet, tried to examine it. I pressed on each joint, testing if some mechanism was hidden. Nothing. It was just well-crafted wood with metal pins and hinges. I reached for some thick rope from a shelf. I bound its arms and legs together. Then I placed it in a wooden crate, closed the lid, and left it in the corner. I even stacked some boxes on top. I thought that would be the end of it. That night, I lay in bed, unable to calm my thoughts. I kept hearing faint taps or scratches in my head, though I couldn't tell if they were real or imagined. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and walked to the workshop with a flashlight. As soon as I opened the door, the overhead light flickered on. My desk lamp was on too, which I never do. The crate in the corner was empty. The rope I'd used was torn apart, the fibers frayed. My pulse pounded. I set my flashlight on the table, shining it around the room. And then I saw it. The puppet was sitting on my main workbench facing me. Its legs hung off the edge. Its arms were free. The head was tilted like it was studying me. My body felt tight. My legs shook. I tried to remain calm, but my voice trembled when I whispered, "How?" I stepped closer. Its wooden face reflected the light and the eyes seemed locked on mine. Then I realized I could barely move my arms. They felt heavy, as if something was pulling them. My right arm lifted even though I didn't want it to. My left arm followed. It was like invisible strings were attached to me. I tried to fight it, but my body wouldn't respond. I took a step forward, then another. I had no control over my own movements. My breathing went shallow and my heart hammered in my chest. All I could do was watch the puppet's hands and feet. They moved in tiny increments, and my limbs moved in sync. I felt like a helpless marionette, while the wooden figure held the power. I didn't know how long I stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. My forehead was covered in sweat. My muscles ached from the tension of resisting. Then the feeling just stopped. My arms fell to my sides. I stumbled backward, panting. The puppet's limbs were still. I stared at it, waiting for it to do something else, but it just remained on the bench, unmoving. I grabbed a hammer from the nearest drawer, ready to smash it, but my hand shook. I couldn't bring myself to destroy my own creation. Instead, I stepped back, keeping my eyes on it, and slipped out of the workshop. I turned off the lights, locked the door from the outside, and hurried back into the house. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. In the morning, I paced around my living room, drinking cups of coffee I didn't even taste. I considered calling someone. But who? The police? They'd probably think I was messing with them. A friend? How would I explain that I have a walking puppet in my workshop? I couldn't come up with a good solution. I forced myself to go back out there and check. The door was still locked, but I felt an ache in my gut as I turned the key. Inside, the puppet was where I'd left it. It hadn't moved, at least not that I could see. I walked up to it slowly. My pulse thundered in my ears. I reached out and touched its shoulder. It felt like ordinary wood. Part of me wanted to throw it in the trash or burn it. Another part of me felt a strange responsibility. I couldn't just destroy a piece of art I'd spent so long creating. I took it in my arms and set it on a table in the corner. Then I decided I would take a break from the workshop for a while. That plan didn't last long. Over the next few days, every time I avoided going in there, I felt an odd pull in my mind. I would hear small knocks at the door. When I walked outside, I sensed movement near the garage window. My appetite disappeared. My eyes felt heavy from lack of proper rest. I was afraid of the puppet, but I was also drawn to it. Eventually, I gave in and went to the workshop again. It was in the middle of the afternoon. Sunlight spilled through the small windows. Everything looked normal. The puppet was still on the table. This time it lay on its side, head turned toward me. Its arms were bent in a rigid shape. I smelled sawdust and old paint as I walked by. I thought maybe it was done haunting me. Maybe it was just a phase. Then, late one evening, I was reading at my desk in the house when I heard a creak behind me. I turned around, half expecting to see nothing. The puppet stood in the doorway. It was upright, its head tilted, arms at its sides. My heart hammered. I couldn't think. I rose from my chair too quickly and almost knocked it over. The puppet didn't move. It just stood there. I approached it, my breath coming in short bursts. With shaking hands, I picked it up. It felt warm, like it had been in motion. I carried it back to the workshop and placed it on the bench. I felt that same pull in my limbs, but I fought it off. The puppet's arms jerked a little, but then stopped. Now I don't know what's going on. I still have the puppet. I can't make myself get rid of it, but I also can't relax. I've tried to tie it up again, and it always seems to free itself. Some nights I stay awake, waiting to hear footsteps or a soft scraping noise. Other nights I hear nothing, but find it in a new position the next morning. I've seen it dance, though the movements are jerky. I felt it control me like an invisible hand around my wrists and ankles. My thoughts race when it happens, and my sweat drips into my eyes. I can't explain it to anyone without sounding like I've lost my mind, so I keep it to myself. I'm telling you now because I need to let it out. I don't have a logical explanation. There are no wires, no complicated mechanisms. It just moves. I've considered the idea that I'm sleepwalking, that I'm the one positioning it around my workshop. But that doesn't explain how my arms moved against my will. That doesn't explain the lock that was on the floor, or the times I've seen it with my own eyes, walking across a table. I have no idea where this will end. For now, I live with it. Every day, I wake up, go to my workshop, and check on the puppet. Sometimes it's exactly where I left it. Other times it's turned slightly, or lying on a different surface. but it's never gone when I arrive. It's always there, like it's waiting for me. And when our eyes meet, I can almost feel a tug, like it wants to control me again. But I fight it. I stare it down until my pulse settles. Then I turn away and try to focus on my other tasks. That's all I can say. I don't have a satisfying conclusion or a logical solution. I'm just a craftsman who built something he can't explain. That's my story. I can't prove any of it, but it's what happened. I still feel the goosebumps on my arms when I remember how it felt to be pulled like that. I still wake up with my heart pounding at random hours, convinced I'll see it in the corner of my bedroom. I haven't yet, but the memory of those moments keeps me on edge. If you're hearing this, maybe you'll think I'm making it up, or maybe you'll believe me. Honestly, I don't care. I just needed to speak the truth. And that's the truth as I know it. I built a marionette that walks without wires. I've seen it move on its own, and I felt it move me too. I wish I had an answer, but I don't. And that's where things stand right now. I got called in on a Sunday afternoon. My boss said there was a problem in one of our suites, the kind of problem that guests kept complaining about, but no one could explain. It was room 414. People said the mirror in there fogged up on its own, like someone was breathing against it. Some guests claimed they saw messages written across the glass. Others said they saw figures moving behind them when they looked at the reflection. We'd had enough negative feedback that corporate insisted on a full renovation of that room. I'd never believed in anything supernatural, so I agreed to handle it myself. I planned to oversee the construction crew, replace the old mirror, and make sure the next occupants felt comfortable. I thought it would be a routine job, just one more line item on my list. But I was wrong. I'm the manager of this place, and I've worked here for 6 years. I usually deal with things like scheduling staff, checking the inventory for linens, and smoothing out small crises that happen all the time in hospitality. A guest left the faucet running and flooded the floor? That's annoying, but it's my job to fix it. A couple got into a shouting match at the bar? I'd talk them down and maybe give them a free drink. This mirror situation felt different from the start. It wasn't just about water damage or a scratch. Guests were spooked. That's not something you ignore in a hotel. Word travels fast, and you don't want a reputation for weirdness. The day I walked into room 414 for the first time, I felt a chill on my arms. It was midday, and the temperature outside was pretty warm, but I had this sense that the air in there was heavier. The room was empty. The housekeeper hadn't put any sheets on the bed because we were planning to do construction anyway. The old mirror was still hanging above the dresser. It was a simple rectangular piece with an ornate wooden frame. The surface looked fine to me. No cracks, no discoloration. I touched it, and it felt normal. But about 2 seconds later, I noticed a faint haze, like the surface was starting to cloud over. I tried wiping the glass with my sleeve. It cleared up for a moment, and then it fogged up again as if someone was breathing right on it. The rest of the room felt normal. There was no steam. The air conditioner was off. I couldn't figure out why that mirror was fogging up in the middle of a dry afternoon. I thought maybe it was a problem with humidity, or the backing of the mirror. I made a mental note to discuss it with the contractor. Then I walked out and left the door open, hoping some fresh air might fix it. That was my first sign that something wasn't right. Later that night, I got a call from the front desk. The clerk on duty said the phone in room 414 was ringing off the hook. I checked the occupancy log. No one should be in there. Renovations were scheduled to start the next day, so the room was supposed to be locked and empty. I walked over to the front desk and asked the clerk to show me the phone lines. Sure enough, the monitor indicated an active call from room 414. That didn't make sense. The line shouldn't even be active without a guest. I told the clerk I'd handle it. I took the elevator up, walked down the hallway, and heard a faint ringing as I got closer. Standing outside the door, I heard the phone stop. Then it started again after a short pause. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was dark because the lamps had been removed for the renovation. The phone on the nightstand was lit up, the ringtone piercing the silence. I picked up the receiver and said, Hello? No answer. There was just a low, raspy breath. I said, "Is anyone there?" The breathing stayed steady for a few seconds, then the line went dead. I hung up and stood there, feeling my heartbeat speed up. I checked the phone cord to see if it was plugged into the wall. It was. I checked the rest of the room. Empty. No sign of intruders. No personal belongings. The mirror on the dresser looked cloudy again. That was the first time I felt a knot in my stomach. The next morning, the renovation crew showed up. They carried in some new fixtures, fresh paint, and a replacement mirror. I told them to remove the old mirror carefully. I stayed there, leaning against the wall, watching them pry it off the dresser. One guy asked if we should donate it or throw it out. I said, "Just put it aside for now." We took the old mirror down to a storage room in the basement. We planned to hang the new one later in the day after the paint dried. I was sure that would solve the problem. But around noon, as I was checking on the paint job, the phone in room 414 started ringing again. The phone wasn't even plugged in because the workers had unplugged all the furniture to paint around the outlets. I hurried across the room and picked it up, but it was silent. No dial tone, no breath, nothing. I felt a sweat break out on the back of my neck. I walked around the room, checking for anything unusual. The walls looked normal, no stains or weird marks. The dresser was empty. The new mirror leaned against the wall, still wrapped in plastic. I checked the bathroom. Everything seemed standard. When I returned to the main area, the phone rang again, loud and shrill. I lifted the receiver. This time there was nothing, not even static. I got frustrated and yanked the cord out from the phone's base. The ringing stopped, obviously. I decided to step out into the hallway and take a minute to clear my head. Later, I had to talk to my boss. I told him about the phone calls. He just shrugged. He said maybe there was a wiring problem or an electrical short. He asked me if the contractor had discovered any structural issues. Nothing out of the ordinary, I told him. He said, "Just get this done. We can't afford more complaints." So I went back up and forced myself to act like none of it bothered me. I told the workers I'd stay after hours to finish cleaning up the mirror area and test everything out. That night, after the crew left, I stayed in room 414 with a bucket of cleaning supplies. The walls were freshly painted, and the place smelled like chemicals. The new mirror was already mounted. It looked nice and clean, no streaks or smudges. I turned on the overhead light and stood in front of it. I saw my reflection. I looked a little tired, but otherwise normal. Then the phone on the nightstand started ringing again. I hadn't plugged it in. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the mirror, checking if it stayed clear. But the ringing kept going, and it sounded louder each time. I finally walked over and answered it. "Hello?" I said. No response. Just that same heavy breathing. My pulse was pounding in my ears. The mirror in the corner of my vision looked like it was starting to fog. I said, "Who is this?" Still no reply. The breathing got faster, like someone was panicking on the other side of the line. I slammed the phone down, but it continued to ring immediately. I lifted it again, shouted into the receiver. Nothing. I threw the phone against the wall. It stopped for a second. Then the phone on the desk, the one meant for housekeeping staff, started ringing. I walked over and picked it up. No dial tone, but the heavy breathing was there too. I felt goosebumps up and down my arms. I decided I had to do something about the mirror. I was sure the phone calls had started after people reported seeing that weird fog. It was like the mirror was a focal point for everything strange. I had some glass cleaner and a cloth. I walked up to the mirror. The glass was hazy. My reflection was faded, like a silhouette behind dirty glass. I sprayed the surface and started wiping. The haziness wouldn't clear. My hand was shaking and my chest felt tight. That's when I heard a faint scrape behind me. I stopped cleaning and stared at my reflection. In the background of the mirror, I saw a shape that looked like a person. It stood near the door, tall and still. My mouth went dry, and I spun around. The door was closed, and the lights were on. No one was there. I turned back to the mirror, and the shape was gone. The glass remained cloudy, though. I leaned in closer, trying to see if it was just dust or a defect in the mirror. That's when a palm print began to appear on the surface. It was slow, like someone was pressing a wet hand against the inside of the glass. I watched the fingers stretch out, one by one, until the outline of the hand was clear. My heart felt like it was hammering in my throat. I backed away, bumping into the dresser behind me. My legs felt weak. For a few seconds I just stood there holding the cloth and staring at that print. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the clerk at the front desk, saying that someone kept calling from room 414, complaining about noise. I told her no one was in here besides me. She said, "Well, the logs show repeated outgoing calls." That made no sense. I had smashed the phone. She asked if everything was okay. I lied and said, "Yeah, just a technical glitch. I'm checking it out." I hung up and looked back at the mirror. The handprint was fading. I wanted to run out of the room, but my boss's words echoed in my head. He needed me to finish. I moved toward the mirror, determined to wipe off that print. I pushed the cloth against the glass, pressing firmly. It faded a bit, but then the mirror fogged up again, faster than before. The phone on the desk slid off onto the floor, even though I hadn't touched it. It landed with a thud. A beep came from the corner near the door. I felt a surge of adrenaline and walked over to check. The door was closed, locked. The beep had come from the small electronic lock near the handle, like someone was trying a keycard from the outside, but no one was on the other side. I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed the phone from the floor and shoved it onto the desk. I left the room, locked it behind me, and marched to the basement to look at the old mirror we'd put in storage. I found it leaning against a stack of old chairs. Even in the dim light of the basement, it looked foggy. The center was cloudy, and I thought I saw a shape move across the glass. My stomach flipped. I forced myself to get closer. My reflection was distorted, like an out-of-focus photograph. The reflection behind me showed a row of shelves, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing there. When I turned around, nothing. I took a step back, heart racing, and decided that I wouldn't bring this mirror back up. I'd get rid of it in the morning. I spent the next few hours pacing around the lobby, telling myself I was overreacting. My arms felt cold, my fingertips tingled, and my mind kept replaying that silhouette. Around midnight, I forced myself to go back to room 414 with a toolbox. I wanted to remove the new mirror from the wall. If there was something about that mirror, maybe putting it away would stop the phone calls and the weird breathing. I walked in. It was quiet, and the air had this stale quality. I switched on the main light. The mirror was still there, and it looked hazy again. The phone was in pieces, so no ring disturbed the silence. I set the toolbox on the dresser and pried the edges of the mirror frame. As I lifted the mirror off the wall, I heard a wheezing sound behind me. My muscles tensed up, and I almost dropped the mirror. I carefully set it down on the dresser and turned around. The wheezing got louder. Then it stopped. I saw nothing, just the painted walls and the empty bed frame. I exhaled, realized I'd been holding my breath. I grabbed the mirror again, determined to carry it out of the room. But as I turned it sideways, I saw that distinct, cloudy handprint on the glass. This time it was on the side facing me. It looked fresh, like someone had just pressed their palm there. The room felt thick with tension, like the air was too dense. I put the mirror down again and wiped it with my cloth. The print smudged, but a second later it started to reappear. My hands shook. The phone on the desk suddenly rang, even though it was still unplugged and partly broken. I left the mirror on the dresser, grabbed the phone receiver and yelled, "Stop it!" The line went dead. My breath came in short bursts. I felt sweat dripping down the side of my face. I tried to calm myself, focusing on the floor beneath my feet, the scent of fresh paint, the faint hum of the building's air system. Then the mirror fell forward onto the floor, glass side down, making a cracking sound. I froze. The mirror didn't shatter completely, but I heard the frame split. I took a deep breath, knelt down, and checked it. There was a small fracture in the corner. The phone rang again, and I nearly jumped. I stood, ignoring the phone, and stepped back. That's when I saw the reflection in the turned-over mirror. The figure stood near the bed, a dark silhouette with faint edges, like a person made of fog. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up. I blinked, and the figure was gone. My skin prickled all over. I rushed to the door. I felt like I couldn't breathe right. My chest was tight, and my legs felt like they might give out. But I made it into the hallway. I locked the door behind me, and then I backed away, trying to get my breathing under control. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my ears. After a minute, I realized I was still gripping the toolbox. The hallway was quiet. No guests wandered around at that hour. I forced myself to return to the elevator, get down to the lobby, and find somewhere else to finish my shift. The next morning, I told my boss we needed to close off room 414 for good, or at least until we could figure out what was happening. He didn't argue. I guess the calls and complaints had continued at the front desk. We moved the mirror pieces to the basement, locked them up, and agreed we wouldn't store anything else in there. I never heard another ring from that phone once it was fully disconnected. We placed a staff-only sign on the door of room 414 and sealed it up. That's the end of my story. There's no grand explanation for what happened in that room. All I know is that I stood there, face to face with a clouded mirror that seemed alive in some way. I heard phone calls that shouldn't have been possible, and saw shapes that couldn't exist. Even now, when I walk by that section of the hallway, I feel my heart rate pick up. And whenever I pass a mirror anywhere else in the hotel, I take a second glance. I still can't say if I believe in ghosts, but I believe something was in that room. I felt it, heard it, and almost saw it. And that's enough for me. I felt a rush of cold air hit my face the instant I stepped off the small transport vehicle that had dropped me near the base of the mountain. I tightened the straps on my backpack and pulled my jacket closer. My breath was already coming out in thick clouds. I didn't see any other people around, and that was how I wanted it. I had planned this expedition for months. I wanted isolation, a real test of my endurance. I had done countless climbs before, but never like this. I was completely alone, and I felt excited. I started my ascent before the sun was fully up. The trail was uneven, made of loose stones and patches of hardened earth. I kicked a few rocks aside with my boots, noticing how each footstep echoed on the cliff walls. The wind picked up. I placed one foot in front of the other in a steady rhythm, forcing my mind to focus on the immediate task of not slipping. After an hour, my thighs started burning, and I paused to rest. I took a long gulp from my water bottle. The air was dry, and I wiped my mouth on my sleeve. I continued upward until midday. My breathing was heavy, and I could feel the pressure change in my ears as I gained altitude. The climbing was hard, but I was prepared for that. I set down my pack near a group of tall boulders and ate some of my food. The sun was harsh, reflecting off the stones. Even with my sunglasses, my eyes felt tired. After a quick lunch, I moved forward again. I had no set timetable. I had mapped out potential campsites, but I wasn't committed to any fixed schedule. By late afternoon, I reached a plateau I hadn't seen on any maps. The path curved around a rocky outcrop and then opened into a wide, flat area. The ground was covered in pebbles and small pockets of dusty grass. The wind was stronger here. It carried a faint whistle that made my ears ring. In the distance, on the far side of the plateau, I noticed something that looked like a circular structure made of stone stacked in a ring. It stood out against the otherwise empty landscape. My curiosity pushed me forward. As I walked closer to it, I realized it was an old stone well. It rose to about waist level, and its surface was rough and weathered. I approached carefully. I'm not superstitious, but it felt out of place. The stones were dark, and I ran a hand over them. They were cold, and the texture scraped my fingertips. It looked ancient. I leaned over and tried to see how deep it went, but it was dark inside. A cool breeze came from within, carrying a faint, earthy smell. While I was still leaning over, I heard a voice. It was quiet, like a whisper. It said my name. I froze. The wind died for a second, and I listened. There was nothing else. My heart pounded in my chest. I looked around, but there was no one on the plateau. I was alone. I shook my head, telling myself the wind must have made a sound that resembled my name. I set up my tent a good distance from the well, but it stayed on my mind. That first night, I had trouble sleeping. The wind rattled the tent fabric and the temperature dropped. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head and tried to relax. The memory of that whisper kept my thoughts racing. Eventually, I drifted off. I woke up a few times during the night because I felt like I heard something outside. Each time I looked around and saw nothing. The next morning I packed up and decided to keep climbing. I wanted to push higher into the mountain. I checked my compass, found the direction I needed, and started moving. About an hour later I came across a rocky pass. The air smelled like damp stone and the wind howled between narrow crevices. I stepped carefully across loose gravel. My jacket flapped loudly. I kept my eyes on the path, worried about slipping. After a tight turn around a large boulder, I noticed a dark shape on my right. I stopped. It was the well again, exactly the same height and the same arrangement of stones. My stomach tightened. I recognized the color, the texture, even a chipped part near the base. It was the same well I had seen on the plateau. I felt confused. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was more than one old well in this area, but I had never seen it marked on any map. I took a step closer. I peered inside again. It was dark. The smell was the same, earthy, damp, stagnant. I listened, holding my breath. My name echoed from within. It was quiet, but I heard it. My chest felt tight and my palms were clammy. I backed away, stumbling over a rock. I wanted to keep moving. I decided to ignore it. I walked on, picking up my pace. The path led me up a steep section of the mountain. My lungs burned as I climbed. My arms and legs felt heavy, but I kept going. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the footsteps, the cold air, and the sound of my breathing. I told myself the well was a coincidence, and the whisper was just my mind playing tricks on me. I clung to that explanation for a while. Around midday, the clouds rolled in and the sky darkened. I found a small ledge to shelter under while I ate something. I sat on a flat rock, chewing on a protein bar, and I felt uneasy. My skin prickled even though I was in a safe spot. I checked my gear. Everything was in place. I took a sip of water. The dryness in my mouth wouldn't go away. I was restless. It felt like something was off. The wind kept changing direction. I thought I heard my name several times, but it was always so faint that I couldn't be sure. I pushed on once the clouds cleared a bit. The ground shifted from rocks to patches of gravel mixed with icy spots. My boots skidded a few times, but I managed to keep my balance. By late afternoon, I saw a rocky ridge that I wanted to cross before sunset. I moved faster than I should have. Sweat trickled down my back under my jacket. When I reached the top of the ridge, my heart pounded from the exertion. I looked down at a narrow valley. At the bottom of that valley, I saw the same circular ring of stones. My mouth went dry. I felt a dull ache at the base of my skull. I crouched down, hoping maybe it wasn't the same well. I used my binoculars. It looked identical. Same structure, same rough stones. I lowered the binoculars and took a deep breath. My mind started racing. I felt a surge of panic. My fingers tingled, and my legs felt weak. I checked my compass, trying to confirm I was heading in the correct direction. I was. There was no logical way for that same well to keep appearing, but it was there, waiting at the bottom of the valley like it belonged there. I decided to descend the ridge on the opposite side. I had no intention of going near the well again. My steps were unsteady because I kept looking over my shoulder. I was sure I heard a faint echo, my name, over and over, like an itch in my ears. The wind gusted, and I smelled something stale. It reminded me of the smell inside the well. My stomach twisted, and I nearly lost my balance. I found a flat spot to set up camp just before dusk. The place was surrounded by jagged rocks. The wind blew in heavy bursts that rattled my equipment. I forced myself to eat some dried fruit and a small energy bar. My hands trembled as I unrolled my sleeping bag. I tried not to think about the well, but every time I closed my eyes, I pictured it. My name kept replaying in my head. I woke up in the middle of the night. My throat was dry, and I coughed. I heard something outside. It was a low echo, like a moan or a whisper. My entire body tensed. I lay very still, listening to the wind hammering the tent walls. I could feel my heart thudding against my ribs. I didn't dare open the tent flap. Eventually, I fell back asleep, but it was restless. When morning came, I felt exhausted. My body was stiff. I packed up my gear as fast as I could. I decided to head further up the mountain, hoping to reach a summit I had marked on my map. The route wasn't easy. I used my ice axe to steady myself on some parts. My breath came in quick gasps in the thinning air. After a tough climb, I reached a spot where the path leveled out. I looked ahead. The well stood there in plain sight. I had no clue how it kept appearing. It wasn't in the same place relative to the terrain. It was always just there, waiting. My head pounded, my mouth felt like sandpaper. My chest tightened, and I could taste bile at the back of my throat. I shouted at it. I called out, "What do you want from me?" My voice echoed, bouncing off the rocks. Then I heard the same voice from the well, answering me with my own name. It repeated details from my past that I had never told anyone. It mentioned a time I made a serious mistake on a previous climb, a mistake that nearly cost me a serious injury. It knew about the times I lied about my personal life to friends. It repeated facts I had kept buried. My hands shook, and I felt beads of sweat on my forehead despite the cold air. I marched toward the well, stopping a few feet away. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. I leaned over it and yelled, "Stop!" The echo came back. It was a broken reflection of my voice, but it spoke my name again. I tasted fear in the back of my mouth. It was bitter. My knees felt weak. My lips trembled. I stepped back and turned around. I wanted to leave it behind once more. My heart was racing and I felt dizzy. Every time I moved away, I thought I heard steps behind me. I would turn around and see nothing. The tension built inside me, making my muscles ache. My pack felt heavier than before. My feet dragged. I wanted to put as much distance between me and that structure as possible. I spent the entire day trying to outpace this nightmare. I climbed over rocks, pushed through loose gravel, and forced my legs to keep moving. I didn't stop for lunch. I drank water while walking. My mouth stayed dry. My body was covered in sweat, and the chill of the altitude seeped into my bones. Occasionally, I would hear my name carried on the wind. I tried to ignore it. By nightfall, I reached a high slope where the land dipped into a small valley. My body was exhausted. I pitched my tent in record time. I crawled inside and zipped the entrance shut. My back ached. My throat felt raw. I tried to calm myself. I repeated simple commands in my head. "You are safe in here. Rest." But I couldn't believe them. The memory of the well was too strong. That voice wouldn't leave my mind. Hours passed. I was half awake, half asleep, in a state of constant tension. Then I heard something outside. It wasn't a faint whisper this time. It was a low call, like someone trying to get my attention. My name again. I felt a lump in my throat. I could hear my heart thudding. My scalp tingled, and sweat gathered on my temples. I forced myself to open the tent flap and look. The moon was up, and I could see the rocky terrain lit by a pale glow. I didn't see anyone. The wind gusted, whipping at the tent. I shut the flap, breathing fast. My teeth were chattering, not from the cold, but from raw fear. Morning came, and I decided I couldn't go any higher. I had planned to reach the summit, but I changed my mind. I was done. I wanted out of there. My priority was to get back to civilization. I turned around and began the descent. My calves burned as I carefully navigated steep sections. The altitude made my head pound, and the cold air stung my face. But I pushed on, trying to keep a steady pace. Halfway down, I passed through a narrow ravine. The walls were close on either side. I glanced up at them. The rock face towered above me. The place was silent except for the crunch of my boots on gravel. Then I saw the well again, right in front of me, blocking the path. It was the same ring of stones, same height, same cold, dark interior. I stopped abruptly. I clenched my fists at my sides. A surge of anger mixed with my fear. I stepped forward and placed my palms on the stones, pushing. They didn't budge. I leaned over and looked inside. My reflection was barely visible in the darkness. Then I heard the voice again. It revealed more details about my life, things I wouldn't repeat to anyone. My knees shook and my arms felt like they had no strength. I pulled back, gasping for breath. I turned away from the well and ran. I forced my body to keep moving down the path. My muscles screamed with each step. My shoulders ached from the tension. The air felt thin and my lungs burned. But I wouldn't stop. Each time the wind blew, it carried that same whisper of my name. The fear never left. My fingers felt numb on my trekking poles. My chest felt tight. Every time I paused for even a moment, I thought I heard the stones scraping against each other, like the well was following me. I didn't look back. By dusk, I finally saw the lower slopes of the mountain where the path flattened out. I kept moving, not caring about how tired I was. I stumbled a few times. Each time I got up and carried on. My body was shaking, and my skin felt clammy under my layers of clothing. Every shadow looked like the outline of that structure. Every shift in the wind sounded like that voice. I fought against the urge to collapse. When I reached a safer trail near the base, I paused. The sunlight was fading, and I could see the silhouette of the peaks behind me. I stood there, breath ragged, eyes scanning the horizon. I expected to see the well, but it wasn't there. I glanced over my shoulder. Just empty land and rock. I felt relief creeping into my chest, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My neck tingled and my shoulders were stiff. I wanted to put as much distance as possible between myself and that mountain. My only goal was to get off that ridge and reach a route that would lead me to a pickup point or some form of shelter. I didn't want to spend another minute out there with that thing possibly appearing again. I can't explain what happened. I don't have a neat explanation. But I know it was real because I can still feel the chill on my skin, and I can still hear my name in every gust of wind. I'm done trying to climb that mountain. I'm heading back to the closest outpost, and I'm not turning around. The image of those stones is burned into my mind, and I can't ignore the echo of that voice. That's all I can say. I'm leaving this place. I want to get home. I first saw that mansion on a quiet morning. The driveway was long and lined with weeds. The house looked empty, and the windows were covered with dust. The roof had missing shingles, and the paint on the walls was chipped. I parked my truck near a rotting fence and got out. The air smelled damp and the wind felt cold against my neck. I looked around and saw the huge yard that I was hired to restore. It felt strange being there alone, but I needed the money. My plan was simple: show up, do my job, and get paid. I had no idea what I was walking into. I'm a landscaper. I've worked on small gardens, city parks, and private estates. I've seen dead lawns, neglected bushes, and overgrown ivy. None of that ever bothered me. I'm used to dealing with dirt, bugs, and the occasional rodent. When I got the call about this old mansion, I thought it was just another gig. The owner's lawyer said the place had been sitting empty for years. They wanted me to fix up the ground so they could put it on the market. I agreed without hesitation. When I walked through the side gate, I noticed there were no footprints in the mud. I stopped and looked down. I had driven through a storm on my way, so the ground was soaked. Normally, one step would leave a clear mark, but my boots didn't leave any impression at all. I lifted my foot and pressed down harder. Nothing. The mud seemed to spring back up right after I moved away. I tried again, moving my heel in a slow circle. Still nothing. I felt a chill run through my arms. I shook off the feeling and told myself it was some weird trick of the soil. Maybe the water was draining quickly. I didn't want to overthink it, so I moved on. The backyard was massive. It had tall hedges, old flower beds, and a dried-up fountain in the center. The grass was damp and slightly overgrown. I thought about starting with the hedges. They were so tall that I couldn't see over the top. Most of the leaves looked wilted, but there were no visible insects. I ran my hand along one of the branches. It felt spongy, not stiff like a dead plant. That struck me as odd, but I took out my notebook and made a few sketches of what needed trimming. My plan for the first day was to do a walkthrough and take notes. I circled around the fountain. The water was gone, but there was still some green moss on the edges. I heard a rustling noise behind me. I turned and saw nothing. I walked back to the hedges, and that's when I felt a slight breeze. It seemed to come from the middle of the hedge, but I couldn't see any gap in the leaves. I paused, listened, and heard a faint whisper. It was so quiet I thought it might be the wind. I leaned closer, but it stopped. I shrugged and decided to leave it for later. I had a lot of work to do. I checked the old flower beds. They were full of rotted stems and leaves. The soil was dark, but it didn't smell rotten. It had a mild scent like wet earth. I made a note to clear those beds and add fresh topsoil later. I had a strange feeling the whole time, like someone was watching me. I kept looking over my shoulder, but all I saw were empty windows. By the afternoon, I was tired. I went inside the mansion to look around for a place to store my tools. The interior was dusty and smelled like old paper. The furniture was covered with sheets. I found a small storage closet near the kitchen. I took out my gloves and pruners and locked them away. Then I climbed the stairs to see if there were any rooms I could use as a temporary office. Most rooms were bare. Some had peeling wallpaper. The floors creaked under my boots. I tested a few lights, but they didn't turn on. I guessed the electricity was off. I didn't want to wander too long, so I headed back outside. I stood in the backyard again, and the air felt heavier. The sky turned gray, and I heard thunder in the distance. I decided to call it a day and come back early tomorrow. I walked across the wet grass to my truck. Still no footprints. It was unsettling. I told myself not to think about it. I drove home, ate a quick dinner, and tried to sleep. That night I dreamed about roots snaking up from the ground. They grabbed my ankles and held me in place. I woke up sweating. My calves felt cramped and stiff. I glanced down at my legs, but there was nothing unusual there. I arrived at the mansion early the next day. The sky was clear and the sun was bright. I approached the hedges with my clippers. I expected them to look the same as they did the day before, but they seemed greener. The leaves didn't appear wilted anymore. It was almost as if they had revived overnight. I touched one branch. It felt sturdy and firm. I was sure it had been limp before. I started trimming the edges. Small twigs snapped under the blades. I brushed the clippings onto the grass. Then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The dried flower beds. They didn't look as dead. Some stalks stood upright, like they had regained strength. I stopped trimming and stared, trying to figure out if I was imagining it. I got down on one knee and touched a stem. It was still dry, but it seemed to be standing on its own. I looked for signs of fresh growth, but there were none. The entire bed still looked brown and lifeless, yet the plants weren't slumped over anymore. I felt uneasy, but I tried to ignore it. I grabbed my rake and began clearing old debris from the grass. An hour later, I picked up my shovel to start loosening the soil in the flower beds. As I worked, I heard a light rustling sound. It came from the hedges again. I turned my head quickly, expecting to see a stray animal. There was nothing. Then I heard a soft voice. It sounded close, but I couldn't make out the words. It was like a slow, whispered conversation in a language I didn't recognize. My heart pounded, and I felt sweat on my forehead. I dropped the shovel and moved toward the hedge. It was motionless. I stood there, listening, but everything was silent again. I kept busy the rest of the day, hauling away dead branches and scraping moss off the fountain. I tried to block out the strange noises. Near sundown, I packed up my tools and brought them inside. I found a small corner room with a table where I could keep track of my progress. I left my boots by the door and slipped on a pair of old sneakers. Then I locked the main door and drove home. That night I had the same dream about the roots. They crawled around my ankles and tugged at my pants. I tried to run, but I couldn't move. I woke up to the sound of my own breath echoing in my bedroom. On the third day, I arrived before sunrise. I noticed an intense floral scent in the air, but I couldn't find a single open bloom anywhere on the property. The flower beds were still mostly dead, aside from those upright stems. The hedges, on the other hand, looked healthier than ever. The leaves were shiny and the branches looked like they had been freshly watered. I couldn't figure out how they were bouncing back so fast. There had been no rain overnight and I hadn't irrigated anything yet. As I walked around the yard, I realized there were 0 footprints behind me, even though the grass was wet with dew. My boots were leaving no marks whatsoever. I bent down and touched the ground. My fingers got muddy, so the moisture was there, but the surface wasn't registering my steps. I felt a tightness in my chest. I wasn't imagining it. This was happening in front of my eyes. I took a deep breath and stood up. I decided to focus on the practical work. I pruned the hedges on the far side of the yard, away from the main walkway. While trimming, I kept glancing at the house windows, expecting to see a face. Nobody was there, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I finished, I walked back to the fountain. The sun was high now, and the warmth felt good. Then I heard the whispering again. This time it sounded like several voices. They were low and urgent, but I couldn't make out any words. I stood still, my hand gripping the clippers. My heart started beating faster. The voices seemed to come from behind the large hedge near the fence. I took a few steps in that direction. The smell of something sweet and floral overwhelmed me. I covered my nose with my sleeve and kept walking. When I got close to the hedge, the whispers stopped. I leaned forward, searching for a hidden speaker or maybe an animal. Nothing. I slowly backed away and returned to the center of the yard. Late in the afternoon, I went to gather my tools from the storage room in the mansion. I took off my boots and set them by the door. They were coated in mud. I stared at them, confused. I had seen no footprints on the grass. How could they be that dirty? I picked one up and felt the wet soil on my fingers. It was thick and clumpy, as if I had been stomping around in a swamp. I checked the walkway I had just used. The ground was damp, but there wasn't a single boot print. I wiped the mud off on a rag and set the boots down again. I tried to push it all out of my head. I told myself there might be an explanation I didn't understand. I grabbed my notebook and started writing down the tasks I had completed. I listed the tools I needed for the next day. Then, out of nowhere, that strong floral scent hit me again. It filled the storage room. The air felt heavy in my lungs. It was overpowering. I glanced out the window. The part of the yard visible from there had no flowers at all, just an empty patch of grass and a withered tree. My eyes started watering from the intense smell. I coughed a little. Then it disappeared, just as quickly as it came. I locked up and left. That night, the dream came again and it felt more real. The roots pulled on my ankles until I fell. My hands sank into the dirt, and I felt the cold soil under my nails. I woke up gasping. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stayed awake until morning, staring at the ceiling. My legs felt stiff, and I kept checking them for dirt. I didn't find any, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The next day, I arrived later than usual. I was so tired that I could barely keep my eyes open. The yard looked more alive than ever. The hedges were almost glowing in the sunlight. The dried flower beds had more stalks standing upright, even though I hadn't watered them or replanted anything. I walked carefully, noticing again the lack of footprints. My boots felt heavier. I looked down and saw fresh mud caked on them, yet the path behind me was clean. The thick floral scent returned, hitting me like a wave. I felt my stomach tighten. I took a few steps toward the center of the yard. My boots made a squishing sound. I glanced back. No prints. Just perfect, undisturbed grass. The whispering started louder this time. It sounded like it was coming from every direction. I spun around trying to locate the source. My heart pounded and I clutched my tool bag. I wanted to leave. I couldn't think about anything except getting out of that place. My palms were sweaty, and my breath came in short bursts. I felt like I was standing in a place that didn't want me there. I forced myself to walk to the fountain. I tried to breathe slowly. The voices faded. I looked around for any physical signs of someone hiding. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. The yard was silent. I moved on to the hedges and started to clip dead leaves. The moment my clippers touched a branch, I heard a low sound. It was like a moan or a sigh. I dropped the clippers and stumbled back. My pulse raced. I picked up my tools and left them near the base of the hedge. I didn't want to stay any longer. I went inside the mansion and hurried to the storage room. I didn't want to go back outside. I sat at the small table trying to steady my breathing. My boots were still caked in mud. The overwhelming floral scent filled the room again. My eyes watered, and my sinuses felt clogged. I coughed until my throat hurt. Then it vanished. I closed my eyes for a moment, thinking about how the grass never showed any sign of my presence. I remembered those plants that seemed to stand upright again after I had seen them wilted. The whispers, the floral scent, the mud on my boots, it all felt real. But I had no proof. I wondered if I was losing my mind. I looked at the time. It was late afternoon. The sunlight through the window had a faint orange hue. I decided to leave and come back in the morning. I grabbed my boots, set them on a piece of newspaper, and slid into my sneakers. On the drive home, I couldn't focus on the road. My thoughts were stuck on the strange things I had seen and heard. I went to bed early, hoping for some rest, but I kept waking up every hour. I heard distant whispers in my half-awake state, and my legs felt achy like I had been running all night. Now I'm sitting here writing this all down. My hands are shaking. I'm supposed to head back there soon and finish the job. I don't know what I'll do when I arrive. The place feels hostile. The plants in the ground seem to be reacting to me in a way that I can't explain. I keep telling myself it's just an overactive imagination, but my muddy boots say otherwise. I can't deny the whispering voices or the overpowering perfume. I don't know what is waiting for me when I step out of my truck this time. All I know is I have a job to do, and I'm not sure how much more of this I can handle. I never expected an old house by the ocean to mess with my head so much. I've never been superstitious or prone to wild imaginings. I teach literature at a university, and I'm used to focusing on facts, dates, and analytical essays. Still, nothing prepared me for what happened during those weeks I stayed in my late grandfather's seaside house. I'm not talking about minor inconveniences or vague noises. I'm talking about windows that refused to stay shut, damp walls leaking salt water, and an odd shape rising over the waves in the middle of the night. Every time I replay these events, I feel my heart pounding faster, like my body doesn't want me to remember. But I need to get this out. I need to say exactly what happened because it still feels too real to dismiss. When I first arrived at the property, the front gate creaked loudly as I shoved it open. Rust fell to my feet. I felt a little jolt of excitement, thinking it would be a quiet vacation. I planned to sort through old documents, maybe find some letters or diaries I could preserve. The sky was mostly gray that day, and the sound of waves carried into the air. The house looked worn from the outside. It had chipped paint, a battered porch, and windows with frames that seemed older than me. I wasn't put off by its condition. I kind of liked it. I decided I'd keep the place. Maybe fix it up someday. I walked inside. The living room smelled like stale air and something I couldn't identify. I opened all the windows to get a breeze going. The floors creaked with every step, and I remember thinking I'd need to watch my footing. The main hallway was narrow, leading to a small kitchen on one side and a staircase going up on the other. I dumped my bags in the hallway and started looking around. The walls were covered in old photographs, some of which I recognized as my grandparents'. Most of the furniture had cloth draped over it. I pulled off a few covers and coughed at the dust floating into my face. By evening, I was tired and decided to unpack the bare essentials in the bedroom upstairs. I located a decent lamp, set up a small table for my notes, and then made a quick meal. That first night seemed normal enough. I closed every window because the breeze felt cold. I made sure I locked them too, because the wind can sometimes whip up pretty hard along the coast. Then I took a shower in the tiny bathroom. The water pressure was weak. I could smell a slight hint of salt in the water, but I assumed it was just the pipes. I went to bed with a sense of calm. The ocean air usually relaxes me, and I expected a solid night of sleep. I woke up the next morning feeling a weird draft on my face. My eyes were halfway open when I realized the curtains were swaying like they do when a strong wind is coming through the window. I sat up and stared. The window was wide open. I could have sworn I locked it. I got up, walked over and checked the latch. It wasn't broken, and it didn't look damaged. I closed it again, pressing it firmly. Then I went around the entire house to see if the other windows were open as well. They were, every single one of them. The living room windows, the kitchen window, even the tiny window in the bathroom that's above the sink. All of them were open. I didn't panic right away. I thought maybe I had been distracted. Maybe I had opened them again in the night for some reason. But I didn't remember doing that. I'm usually meticulous about locking up. Still, I wrote it off as a one-time fluke. I shut them all, locked them all, and continued with my day. I spent most of that morning organizing files in the study. I found some property records, old maps of the area, and a small box containing a few of my grandfather's journals. I skimmed through one of them, but it was mostly about fishing trips and daily weather conditions. I assumed the rest would be similar. That night, after I finished a simple dinner, I locked every window and even double-checked them. I went upstairs, read for a while, and eventually dozed off. When I opened my eyes the next day, the first thing I felt was a strong breeze again. I sat up with a start. The window across my bed was open wide. The latch was flipped back. I got a chill through my whole body. I moved to the hallway and looked at the other windows. Same situation. They were all open, even though I remembered locking them tight. My heart thumped in my chest and my skin felt prickly. On the third morning of this happening, I started to question my own memory. Maybe I was too tired, or maybe there was some issue with the old frames. I checked for drafts. I inspected the locks. Nothing seemed broken or out of alignment. I felt uneasy the entire day. When night fell, I made sure to lock them again. I even wedged a chair against the window in my bedroom. I wedged a piece of wood against the windowsill in the living room. I wanted to see if anything or anyone was forcing them open. Then I went to sleep feeling restless. I woke up to that same breeze on my face. The windows were open. The chair was moved aside. The piece of wood in the living room was on the floor. I felt my stomach clench. My skin started to sweat. I walked around the house in a daze, checking each window again. All wide open. I felt the cool air from outside, and the wind made a low, humming sound along the walls. My mind couldn't come up with a rational explanation. There were no footprints, no forced locks, no signs of a break-in. I tried to brush it off, but then another thing started happening. I began to hear a strange noise at night, usually when I was heading to bed. It sounded like the wind you hear by the beach, but it was coming from inside the house. I would walk around, trying to locate the source. The sound would move through the corridors, like a faint whooshing. It reminded me of a breeze passing through cracks, but the doors and windows were closed at those moments. I felt my scalp tighten whenever I heard it. My mouth went dry, and my heart thudded in my chest. I'd stand there, hoping it was just normal house sounds. Then I'd feel cold air brush past me and my hair would stand on end. A few days later, I noticed the walls in the hallway had streaks of moisture. I ran my hand along one spot, and it was wet. It felt slightly salty. I tasted it, though that might sound odd. It was definitely salt water. There was no pipe in that wall, and I couldn't understand how salt water could leak in. I grabbed some towels and tried to dry it, but the moisture came back each time. I kept wiping it down, and it kept returning. I felt unsettled by that, but I convinced myself there had to be a plumbing issue or some strange humidity from the ocean. Each night, I locked the windows. Each morning, they were open. I became obsessed with checking them. I'd lock them after breakfast, after lunch, after dinner. No matter what I did, I'd come back later to find them open. I would stare at them, hearing my own breathing get heavier. My palms would sweat, and I'd feel this tightness in my stomach. Sometimes I found myself trembling. That's when I started sleeping less. I'd stay awake, listening for movement in the house. I'd walk around with a flashlight, looking for some trick in the frames or some hole in the wall. I found nothing. Then one night, while I was dozing off with the lamp still on, I heard that inside breeze again. I got up, grabbing my flashlight. My heart was racing. I could feel sweat on my forehead. I moved into the hallway, saw the walls were glistening with that wet streak again, and I swore I heard a faint dripping sound. When I touched the wall, my fingertips came away with salt water. Then I heard a creak from the living room. I rushed down the stairs, trying to be quiet. My pulse throbbed in my temples. I flipped on the light, and sure enough, the windows were open. The night air blew in, smelling like sea salt. I walked to the window, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I noticed something on the windowsill. There were droplets of water, like small pools of salt water. I looked out at the shore. The beach was dark, except for the line of the moonlight over the waves. I couldn't see anything at first. Then I thought I saw a shadow move across the water, far out by the edge. My stomach tensed, but I told myself it was a trick of the light. The waves were rolling in, and the wind was strong. A few nights later, I woke up at around 2 a.m. I felt this urge to check the living room window again. I crept downstairs, flashlight in hand. The rest of the house was dark. My breathing was loud. I heard my heartbeat in my ears. When I reached the living room, I saw the window was open. The curtains billowed out into the room. I approached the window, carefully leaning forward to look outside. The moon was bright, and I could see the white foam of the crashing waves. Then I noticed a shape in the distance. It was tall, darker than the sky, and it seemed to shift. At first I thought it could be a rock formation or the silhouette of a fishing boat's mast, but I kept watching. The shape seemed to rise and fall slightly, like it was moving with the rhythm of the ocean. My heart pounded. My throat felt tight. I realized it was closer than I thought. I aimed my flashlight toward it, but it was too far to see clearly. I could feel my hands shaking. My flashlight beam trembled across the water, catching nothing. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. I stood there for a while, just staring at the waves, waiting to see if the shape would vanish. It didn't vanish. It stayed there, almost like it was watching me. I felt sick to my stomach. My legs felt weak. After that night, I became fixated on the idea that something in the sea was responsible for the open windows and the salt water on the walls. I can't explain it logically, but I kept feeling watched whenever I passed by a window. I started keeping the curtains shut, though they'd end up pulled open by morning. There were no footprints in the yard, no sign of forced entry, just the same routine of locked windows turning into wide open ones by dawn. One morning, after another restless night, I woke up to a strong smell of the ocean, but it was coming from inside the house. I followed the smell to the kitchen, where I found a thin layer of salt water on the floor. It looked like the tide had come in while I slept, but there was no flooding outside. The porch was dry. The beach was a short walk away, and there were no water tracks leading from the shore to the house. The smell was overwhelming. I wiped it up, and my hands felt gritty afterward. Days passed in a blur of anxiety. I was getting jumpy at every little noise. My phone rang once and I nearly dropped it. A neighbor asked if I was settling in okay, and I lied, saying everything was fine. I didn't want people thinking I was losing my grip. At the same time, I felt like I was on the edge of something I couldn't explain. I stayed up most nights, reading my grandfather's journals, looking for any mention of windows or salt water or something strange. I found nothing that hinted at anything supernatural. He mostly talked about daily weather, repairs, and local fishing. Then came that final night before I decided I had to leave. I was dead tired. My eyes kept closing as I tried to force myself to stay awake. Around midnight, I heard the inside breeze sound again. It drifted down the hallway, a gentle whooshing noise. I felt my shoulders tense. My mind told me to go check, so I rose from my bed. My legs were stiff. My back felt tight. I grabbed my flashlight. The house was quiet except for the creaks of the old floorboards under my feet. The air felt damp. The salt smell was strong. I reached the window in my bedroom. It was open. I looked outside and saw the outline of the beach. The moon was partly covered by clouds. I squinted, scanning the shoreline, trying to see if that shape was still out there. My flashlight barely reached the sand. Then I heard a splash from somewhere near the rocky part of the shore. My heart skipped a beat. I leaned out a bit, shining the light toward the sound. The water shimmered under the beam, but I didn't see anything. I heard another splash. Then I felt a rush of cold wind on my face. My breath caught in my throat. I aimed the light farther out beyond the rocks. There it was again. That shape. It was taller this time, or maybe it looked that way because it was closer. The surface of the ocean shifted around it, and I felt a wave of nausea. My mind went blank except for one thought. Get out. I wanted to slam the window shut, but I froze. My hands were shaking so badly that the flashlight beam wobbled across the water. The shape seemed to move up and down, like it was riding a wave, but it never sank or disappeared. I didn't see arms or legs or eyes, just a dark mass that looked dense and alive. I stepped back from the window, finally pulling it down. I locked it. My breath was quick and shallow. My chest felt tight. I turned around and ran through the hallway, checking the other windows. Every single one was open again. I tried to close them, but my hands were trembling. The wind outside grew stronger, and the curtains whipped around. My heart was racing, and I could hear blood pounding in my ears. I heard another splash, louder this time, like something massive hitting the water. I glanced outside through the nearest window. The shape was closer. I couldn't see it clearly in the dark, but it looked bigger than before. I fumbled with the window latch, slammed it shut, and locked it. I felt trapped. The walls were wet to the touch. Water trickled down in thin streams, and my shoes left footprints on the damp floor. My breathing sounded rough. I had this urgent feeling that I needed to leave the house. I rushed around, shutting every window, locking them, but I knew it didn't matter. They'd be open by morning. Still, I had to do something. Once I'd gone through every room, I grabbed my car keys and ran out the front door. I glanced back at the house. I saw the upstairs windows were already open. The curtains flapped in the wind like flags. I felt a chill move through my body, and my knees threatened to give out. I got into my car and drove away. I returned the next afternoon, and I only went back inside long enough to pack my belongings. Every window was wide open, and puddles of salt water were on the floors. The house smelled like the ocean. The dampness in the hallway was worse. Water dripped steadily from the walls. I grabbed my suitcase and documents, locked the front door, and left. I didn't bother closing the windows. I didn't see the shape that day, but I felt uneasy the entire time. My nerves were shot, and I knew I couldn't spend another night there. I still don't know what was out there in the waves or why the windows refused to stay closed, but I do know this. I'll never spend another night in that house. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something from the sea followed me, or still watches that house waiting for someone else to move in. I got off the bus that night feeling an ache in my legs and a raw dryness in my throat. I was tired of traveling back and forth between towns, lugging my samples and catalogs everywhere. I wanted a place to rest for more than a few hours. I'd found a listing for a room in a 2-story house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. It was a single paragraph in the local paper. Room for rent. Separate entrance. Short-term stays. Welcome. It felt like the perfect solution to my constant traveling. I walked up the cracked walkway, noticing chipped paint on the porch railing and a single overhead light that flickered every few seconds. The front door was heavy and needed a firm push to open. Inside, the air smelled stale, like someone had tried to cover old mildew with cheap air freshener. The landlord, a middle-aged man named Carlos, stood at the end of the small hallway. He nodded when I introduced myself. His handshake was limp, and he looked at me with half-closed eyes as if he wasn't used to having people around. He led me to the second floor. My room was at the far end of the hallway. It had a narrow bed against the wall, a small wooden table, and a single window with a view of a dark, overgrown backyard. The walls had faded wallpaper that curled near the corners. There was a low-watt bulb in the ceiling fixture, giving the room a dim, yellowish glow. I put my suitcase on the bed and thanked him for accepting a short-term renter. He just nodded again and said not to worry about anything. Then he told me to keep my door locked at night. He mentioned a general rule of the house: no visitors and no wandering around after midnight. He said it like a warning, and I felt a strange chill in my gut, but I brushed it off as tiredness. The first night was quiet for the most part. I showered in the small bathroom across the hall, which had chipped tiles and a constant dripping sound from the faucet. Then I lay down, planning to fall asleep right away. But around 2 a.m, I heard a low noise above me. It sounded like someone shifting heavy furniture, followed by a faint creaking like old floorboards under pressure. I sat up in bed, my heart ticking faster. I thought maybe Carlos was doing some chores late at night, but the noise had a different feel to it. It came in bursts. A low groan, a few seconds of nothing, then a muffled scraping sound. It continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped. My arms were stiff, and I gripped the sheet with tense fingers. I waited to see if it would start again, but the silence was complete. I eventually dozed off. The next morning, I felt off balance. My neck was sore, and my eyes stung. As I was heading out for work, I saw Carlos in the kitchen. He was eating cereal, staring out the window with a blank face. I said good morning and asked if he had been moving things in the attic the night before. He looked at me, shrugged, and said he didn't have an attic full of anything important. He added that the old house sometimes made weird sounds. There was a stiffness in his voice that made me uneasy. I didn't press the issue. I had to get on the road. For the next couple of days, I tried to ignore the strange late-night sounds. They happened almost every night, usually after midnight. Sometimes I heard what I can only describe as a soft moan, like a person in pain, but muffled by thick walls. Other times there were squeaks or taps like small feet scurrying over planks. I tried turning on music to drown it out, but it always cut through whatever I played. My ears locked onto those noises even if I turned the volume up. One night, after a day of unsuccessful sales visits, I came back to my room and realized my spare shirt was missing. I searched my suitcase in the small closet, but it was gone. I figured maybe I'd left it in my car or something, but I was pretty sure I'd hung it on a hook by the door. The next morning, I found my comb was missing from the table. I checked under the bed and everywhere else, but it wasn't there. My mind started to spin with worries. I thought maybe I was just forgetting things because of stress. But a few days later, a pair of socks disappeared. That was when I started feeling paranoid. I asked Carlos if someone else had access to my room. He shrugged again, gave me a quick no, and told me I was probably just misplacing items. His eyes didn't meet mine when he said it, though. I didn't like his short answers. He acted like I was a nuisance for even bringing it up. I kept telling myself I was just tired or scattered. But at night, the noises got worse. The moans were louder, sometimes turning into a kind of hiss, followed by a scraping sound on the ceiling. My stomach got tight every time I heard it. My skin felt cold, and sweat broke out on my forehead. One weekend, I decided to stay in town instead of driving out for a sales trip. I spent most of the day in my room, trying to catch up on paperwork and phone calls. I didn't see Carlos at all. The house felt empty, with an odd smell drifting in the hallway. It reminded me of damp boxes stored away for too long. By early evening, I felt restless. My body was tense, and I couldn't relax. The missing items, the strange noises, and Carlos's attitude were weighing on me. I paced around my room looking at the ceiling. I wanted to go up there and see what was going on, but I kept hesitating. My heart pounded every time I thought about it. That night I fell asleep around 11, but I woke up again at 1 a.m. to a strange thumping overhead. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy, then dropping it. My mouth went dry and my hands were shaking. I sat up, swung my legs over the edge of the bed and just listened. The thumping turned into low moans, then into faint whispers. I couldn't make out actual words, but it felt like someone was trying to speak through layers of fabric or walls. My chest tightened and I felt a drop of sweat roll down my temple. My pulse throbbed in my neck. I got up, turned on my lamp and opened my door. The hallway was dark. I knew the entrance to the attic was at the end of the hall, a small wooden door in the ceiling. I'd seen the pull-down ladder once when Carlos was showing me around. I grabbed a small flashlight from my bag. My footsteps on the old floorboards made sharp creaks. My heart felt like it was trying to punch through my chest. I kept looking around, hoping I wouldn't see anything weird. The door to Carlos's bedroom was shut. The door to the attic was right above me, a rectangular hatch. I stood under it, trying to decide if I should pull it down. My hand was trembling. I felt a sudden cold breeze on my arms. The hallway window was closed, so I didn't understand where that cold air was coming from. I swallowed hard, reached up and found the small ring that unlocked the attic stairs. It came down with a screech, and a bit of dust fell onto my hair and face. The noises had stopped, which only made it feel worse. There was just an eerie silence pressing on my ears. I stood there for a few seconds, flashlight in hand, looking up into that dark rectangle. My mind kept screaming at me to go back to my room, lock the door, and wait until morning. But my curiosity and my frustration over the missing items pushed me forward. I put my foot on the first step. The wooden ladder groaned under my weight. I could feel my pulse in my throat, and my breathing got faster. I reached the top and tried to shine the flashlight around. The space was cramped with a low ceiling and wooden beams that were covered in dusty cobwebs. The floor was uneven, with old boards that looked like they'd snap if I stepped in the wrong spot. There were stacks of boxes on one side, some covered with stained sheets. I saw the outlines of old chairs and a small dresser, all shoved against the far wall. I moved the beam of the flashlight slowly, trying to take it all in. My throat felt tight, and I could hear my own breathing in my ears. The air up there was thick, smelling like mildew and something else that made my nose itch. As I took a few steps, I noticed a large mirror leaning against one of the support beams. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a wooden frame that had carved details. The glass was grimy, but I could still see my reflection. My face looked pale and tense. I moved closer, keeping the flashlight on the mirror. That's when I noticed the handprints. They were all over the glass, like someone, or maybe more than one person, had pressed their palms against it. There were smudges shaped like fingers streaking down, as if they'd been dragged. My stomach clenched. I felt a spike of fear in my chest. I tried to breathe normally, but my breath came out in short gasps. I reached out and touched the surface of the mirror. It was cold, colder than the air around me. I pulled my hand back and looked at my fingers. There was no dust on them, which was strange because the rest of the attic was covered in it. Something about that mirror felt off. I sensed an odd pressure in my head, like I had water in my ears. I heard a rustling sound behind me. I spun around with my flashlight pointed at the boxes, but I saw nothing moving. My heart pounded so loud I swore it would echo. Then I heard a faint whisper that seemed to come from the direction of the mirror. I whipped around again and my flashlight flickered. I tapped it and the light steadied. I noticed that within the mirror's reflection, the dusty furniture behind me looked warped, like the edges were blurred. My mouth went dry. I felt a chill crawl across my scalp, down my spine, and into my arms. I didn't want to stay there any longer. Something was wrong in that attic. I backed away, keeping the mirror in my flashlight beam until I reached the edge of the pull-down ladder. I climbed down carefully, my legs shaky. The ladder squealed and the door slammed shut above me with a dull thud. I almost lost my balance from the shock. I caught the edge of the ladder with my free hand, scraping my knuckles. When I got both feet on the hallway floor, I was breathing like I'd run a marathon. I looked around, half expecting Carlos to be standing there with a weird expression, but the hallway was empty. I hurried back to my room, locked the door, and leaned against it. My hands were clammy and my heart felt like it was about to explode. I grabbed some water from the small jug I kept on the table and drank it. It tasted stale, but it calmed me a little. I sat on the edge of the bed trying to organize my thoughts. I felt jumpy. My body was on high alert and I could feel goosebumps on my arms. I kept picturing those handprints on the mirror and the thick, cold air in the attic. I noticed my flashlight was still on, shining on the wall in a trembling circle. I turned it off and lay down, but I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper, or imagined something pressing its hands against the other side of the mirror. The next morning, I considered leaving the house for good. I wasn't locked into a long contract, and I could find a motel if needed. But part of me wanted to confront Carlos and demand an explanation. I waited for him in the kitchen around 8. He came down the stairs, rubbing his eyes. He mumbled a greeting. I told him flat out that I'd gone to the attic. He froze for a second, then told me I shouldn't have done that. He said the attic was off limits. When I pressed him on the noises and the strange mirror, he shook his head and said I'd been imagining things. He told me I should focus on my job and not the old house. I felt a surge of anger, but I stayed calm. I told him I'd be out by the end of the week. He shrugged like he didn't care. For the next few days, I heard the noises every night. I heard those moans and whispers. I found another missing item, my pen, the one I used for signing contracts. I didn't bother asking Carlos anymore. I just stayed in my room, packed my things, and forced myself to sleep with the light on. My nerves were shot. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the mirror and the prints. My body felt tense and I jumped at small sounds, like water dripping in the bathroom or branches hitting the side of the house. On my last night, I heard another series of thumps above me. I tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't stop. I could feel my pulse racing. I told myself it was my final night and I'd be out of there in the morning. The noises went on for at least an hour, then ended suddenly. That final silence weighed on me. I felt a mix of relief and dread, like I was waiting for something else to happen. Eventually, I drifted into an uneasy sleep. By morning, I was packed and ready to go. Carlos was nowhere to be seen. I left the key on the kitchen table. Before I walked out, I glanced at the ceiling in the hallway. I thought about the attic door and that mirror. My neck muscles tensed, and a chill ran through me. I didn't know what was up there, or what was creating those handprints. I just knew it wasn't normal. I walked out, got into my car, and drove off, feeling my shoulders relax the moment I was a few blocks away. I never went back for any of the items I'd lost. Even now, when I think about that place, my heart beats faster. I remember the stale smell, the cold air on my skin, and the way my hair stood on end at every noise. I'll never forget those handprints on the mirror or the strange whispers in the attic. I don't know if there was something in that house or if Carlos was hiding some odd secret. All I know is that I'll never rent a room from a stranger again. I'd rather sleep in my car than spend another night listening to those distant moans and scratching sounds above my head. Some questions just aren't worth answering, and some things are better left alone. And that's the whole story. I found that portrait in a cramped storage room at an old estate. I was there to pick up a set of antique chairs that the owner had advertised. The chairs were in terrible shape, but I noticed a corner of a canvas sticking out behind a dusty trunk. I pulled it free and saw my own face staring back at me. The man in the painting had the same jawline, the same hairline, and the same small mark above the right eyebrow that I have from a minor accident years ago. I felt a jolt in my stomach. It looked like me, except the clothes were old-fashioned. The paint was cracked, but the colors were still vivid. I asked the owner about it, and he said he never noticed it before. He said it might have belonged to his grandfather, who collected odd things. I bought it for a low price because he seemed happy to get rid of it. I took it home in my truck. During the drive, I kept glancing at the portrait. It was propped against some boxes in the passenger seat. The face stared forward with a stiff expression. The brushstrokes were detailed, giving the eyes a strange shine. I felt uneasy, but I also felt excited. I thought maybe it could be worth a lot of money because of its detail and the era it might be from. I deal with antiques, and something about it gave me a gut feeling that it was valuable. But there was also another feeling, a sense that I was bringing something unwelcome into my life. When I arrived at my house, I left the portrait in my hallway at first. I usually keep new finds in my workshop, but I wanted to look at it more closely in better lighting. That night, while I was in my living room, I heard a faint creaking sound. It was an old house, so I often heard random noises. Still, I decided to check the hallway. The painting was exactly where I left it, leaned against the wall. It had that same expression, serious but calm. I stared at it for a moment. The eyes seemed a bit different, though I couldn't say how. Maybe it was just the shadows. I turned on the overhead light. The portrait looked normal. There was no movement in the eyes, nothing unusual. I felt a bit silly, so I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep well. I kept thinking about how the man in the painting looked like me. I wondered if maybe I had an ancestor who looked the same. The next morning, I placed the portrait on a table in my workshop. I tried to do some research on the style of painting and the materials used, but I couldn't find any distinct markings. I checked the back of the canvas. There was a faint signature, but it was too smudged to read. I still felt sure it was old. A few days passed and I noticed small changes. Sometimes when I walked by, the man in the painting seemed to be looking to the right instead of straight ahead. Other times, I could swear the corners of his mouth curved ever so slightly. I chalked it up to my imagination. I've studied old paintings before, and brushstrokes can create optical illusions. Still, I kept my distance. I started closing the door to the workshop just so I wouldn't catch glimpses of it. One afternoon, I decided to photograph the painting for insurance purposes. I set up a camera and took a few shots. When I checked the images, I froze. In the photos, the man's eyes were partly closed in one shot, as if he had blinked. I thought it might be the angle or a reflection. I deleted those shots and took new ones. The new photos looked normal. I told myself I must have misread a glare or a shadow. I tried not to dwell on it, but the hair on my arms was standing up. That evening, I went to watch TV in my living room. I left the workshop door open without thinking about it. Around midnight, I heard a soft scrape. I muted the TV and listened. Another scrape, like something was dragging across the floor. My chest tightened. I stood up and walked slowly to the workshop. I found the painting leaning against a different wall near the door. I know I left it propped on the table. It couldn't have slid off that far on its own. I checked the floor for marks and saw faint scrapes leading from the table to the door. I felt a chill on my neck. I decided to move the painting out of the house. I took it out to the garage and placed it against a large cabinet. I made sure it was stable. I went back inside and locked the door. I woke up several times that night thinking I heard a tapping noise. I told myself it was just the wind outside. The next morning, I went to the garage. The painting wasn't where I left it. It was on the floor, face up, about 3 feet away from the cabinet. I checked the edges for damage. The surface was fine, but the expression looked different. The lips were slightly parted, and the eyes seemed more focused. My hands felt sweaty. I brought the painting back into my workshop because I didn't want it out in the open. I shoved it into a corner behind a large desk. I told myself I was imagining all these changes. It's easy to see faces where there are none, or see movement in shadows. I tried to keep busy. I worked on restoring an old clock. While I worked, I felt like something was behind me. I refused to look. I heard what sounded like a quiet creak of wood. My stomach felt tight. I spun around. The painting was still in the corner, but the table next to it seemed to have shifted slightly, like something had bumped it. I exhaled and returned to my task, but my hands trembled. That night, I locked the workshop door and went to bed early. I felt anxious, and my head was throbbing. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a muffled thud. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. Another thud, then silence. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the hallway. The workshop door was still locked. I unlocked it and peered in. The painting was on my workbench now, leaning upright. I had left it in the corner. There were no footprints on the floor, no sign of forced entry. I felt my mouth go dry. I set the flashlight on the bench, picked up the painting, and turned it around so it faced the wall. I locked the workshop again, went to my bedroom, and shut the door. My heart wouldn't slow down for a long time. In the morning, I took a large sheet and covered the painting completely. I figured if I couldn't see it, I could forget about it. I wanted to take it to an auction house or maybe store it somewhere else, but I had a nagging sense that I needed to handle it carefully. I'm an antique dealer, and I know certain items can have unusual histories. I wasn't ready to get rid of it yet, though I was tempted. All day I avoided the workshop. I did chores around the house. I ran some errands. I came back in the late afternoon. The house was quiet. I steeled myself and entered the workshop. The sheet was off the painting, resting on the floor next to the desk. The portrait stared straight ahead, but the eyes looked a bit wider than before. I felt panic crawl up my chest. I picked up the sheet and covered it again. My hands shook as I did it. I heard a faint sound like scraping or scratching. It was coming from underneath the sheet. I stepped back. The noise was light, but constant. It reminded me of fingernails scraping wood, but I didn't see any movement in the sheet. My throat felt tight. I backed out of the workshop and closed the door. I sat in my living room trying to calm down. My legs were unsteady, and my palms were damp. My heart hammered in my chest. I kept staring at the hallway, half expecting the workshop door to open on its own. It didn't. I told myself I would go back and check in 10 minutes. I tried to breathe slowly. When I finally got up the courage, I went back. The door was still closed. I opened it and I saw the sheet on the ground again, bunched up near the table saw. The painting was uncovered, leaning against a different wall. The expression on the face seemed close to a grin. The eyes looked bright. I couldn't believe how alive it appeared. I walked forward. My hands were trembling. I lifted the painting to move it back to the table, and I felt a slight resistance, as if the painting was heavier than before. I strained to carry it. Once it was on the table, I grabbed some twine and tried to tie the sheet around it. I didn't want it sliding off or shifting. As soon as I pulled the twine tight, I heard a distinct scratching noise. It felt like something was clawing from inside the painting or from the back of the canvas. I tied it anyway, hands shaking. Then I left and locked the door again. That night I stayed in the living room. I didn't watch TV, I just sat there staring at the hallway. Around midnight I heard a soft click, like a doorknob turning. I jumped up. The workshop door was open. I didn't hear it open. It was just ajar. I shone my flashlight inside. The painting stood upright in the center of the room. The sheet was off again, and the twine was on the floor. My ears started ringing. I felt lightheaded. Then I heard a faint sound like a breath. I told myself it was in my head. I flicked on the light switch and watched the portrait. The man's eyes looked locked onto mine. His lips seemed curved in a half smile. I felt a freezing sensation in my chest. I slammed the door shut, turned the key, and backed away. My hands were clammy. I barely slept. I kept hearing that scratching noise in my head. In the morning, I gathered my nerves. I planned to cover the painting with the sheet again and move it to the truck. I didn't know where I'd take it, but I didn't want it in my home anymore. I opened the workshop door slowly. The painting was still in the same spot. The expression was the same. The eyes were wide, and the mouth had that slight curve. The surface seemed glossy, like fresh paint. There was a smell in the room, like old varnish and something damp. I took a deep breath and reached for the sheet on the floor. A sharp scraping sound started up again, like nails on wood. My skin prickled. I covered the painting quickly. The scratching noise got louder. I tried to ignore it. I lifted the covered painting and carried it toward the door. My legs wobbled. I felt warmth at my neck, like someone was breathing on me. I kept walking. The painting felt heavier with every step, but I made it to the hallway. I headed outside to load it into my truck. At the front door, the painting slipped from my grasp and tilted to one side, still covered. I almost dropped it. The scratching noise went silent for a second, then resumed in short bursts. I put it down carefully. My heart pounded. I felt sweat on my forehead. I wrestled with the doorknob while trying to keep the painting balanced. The doorknob jammed, forcing me to yank the door open. I hauled the painting onto my porch. The sunlight hit the sheet, outlining the shape underneath. The scratching sound seemed to come from the center of the canvas. My spine tingled. I swallowed hard and continued. I opened my truck, slid the painting in, and closed the door. The scratching noise was muffled now. I took a moment to breathe. My hands were shaking and my shirt was damp with sweat. I looked through the window of the truck. The sheet wasn't moving, but I thought I saw a slight bulge near the face area. I turned away and walked back inside to get my keys. As soon as I stepped back into the house, I felt a surge of dread. The idea of driving alone with that painting in the truck made my stomach twist, but I couldn't keep it here. I needed it gone. I was about to lock up the house when I heard a noise from outside. I opened the front door and saw that the truck's passenger door was wide open. The painting was leaning against the seat, partially uncovered. The sheet was half pulled away. The face was visible through the windshield and it seemed to have a full smile. The eyes looked alert. The seatbelt was coiled around the lower part of the frame. I felt my throat tighten and I froze on the top step of my porch. I stood there, not knowing what to do. The painting didn't move. It just sat there, staring. The corners of the mouth were raised, and the eyebrows looked tense, like it was focused on me. I shut the front door behind me and walked toward the truck. My feet felt heavy. The sheet slid off a bit more, revealing the man's shoulder and part of his chest. The colors looked fresher than before. I reached out to grab the sheet again, and I heard a low scraping sound from inside the cab. My breath caught in my throat. I climbed into the driver's seat, ignoring the sensation that the eyes were following my every move. I pulled the door shut and locked it. I looked straight ahead, refusing to meet the painting's gaze. I turned the key, started the engine, and gripped the steering wheel with both hands. I felt the presence of those eyes to my right, but I didn't look. That's how I left my house. I drove off with the painting in the passenger seat, half covered and half exposed. My heart hammered. My arms felt tense on the wheel. I could hear soft scraping sounds whenever I slowed down. I didn't know my final destination. I just knew I couldn't keep it. My plan was to find some storage facility or maybe an auction house that would take it. But the more I drove, the more I worried about leaving it anywhere near other people. It felt like I was stuck with it. At every stoplight, I tried not to glance at it, but I did anyway. Each time the eyes seemed fixed on me. The mouth looked ready to form a word. I kept driving, my chest tight, until I was out of my neighborhood. I felt a mix of relief and fear, unsure of what would happen next. I couldn't hear the scratching anymore over the noise of the road, but I imagined it was still there, just masked by the engine. I couldn't stop thinking about that grin, those focused eyes, and how closely the painted face resembled mine. I kept my hands on the wheel, stared ahead, and pushed the truck to keep moving. That's the last thing I remember about my house with that portrait inside. I haven't been back since. I still remember how the wind felt that afternoon on the beach. It was hot and the air smelled like salt and seaweed. My shirt clung to my back and my feet sank a little every time I stepped on the wet sand. I was just trying to clear my head. Work had been grinding me down and I needed some peace. I walked near the shoreline looking for shells or anything interesting that washed up. That's when I saw it. A small figure, maybe the size of my fist, sitting on a patch of smooth sand. It looked like a sculpture made of salt. The surface was rough and it glistened in the sunlight. I don't know why I felt so drawn to it, but I picked it up, brushed a bit of sand off, and took it home. Once I got back to my apartment, I set the salt figure on the edge of my coffee table. I didn't think much about it at first. It looked kind of crudely shaped, maybe like a person in a vague stance. But the details were worn down, as if it had been in the water for a while. My apartment was stuffy, so I opened a window. The breeze coming in smelled more like city and car fumes than the ocean, which felt disappointing after that peaceful walk. I stared at the figure for a moment. It didn't look like anything special. It felt gritty in my hands and left a fine powder on my fingertips. I went to the kitchen to fix some dinner. I had some leftover pasta, so I warmed that up. I tried to focus on the taste, but I kept thinking about the sculpture. There was something off about it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it gave me an uneasy feeling. I'm not a superstitious person, but I remember glancing back at it every few minutes. It just sat there, completely still. After dinner, I turned on the TV, hoping to wind down. I tried to ignore the figure, but I found myself looking at it over and over. I even moved it to a different spot on the table just so it wouldn't be in my direct line of sight. Later that night, I felt exhausted, so I decided to go to bed. I left the sculpture where it was. In my bedroom, I opened the window a crack and listened to the traffic outside. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that white, grainy shape. When I finally drifted off, I had strange dreams. I saw shifting shapes moving in my living room. I heard creaking sounds. I felt my heart racing, even in my sleep. I woke up around 2 a.m. covered in sweat. The sheets clung to my skin. The room was warm and the air was still. I thought I heard a scraping noise like something sliding against the wooden floor. My mouth felt dry, so I got up to grab some water. I stepped into the hallway. The living room was dark except for a bit of light from the street lamp outside. At first, I couldn't see the sculpture on the coffee table. I flipped the light switch. It wasn't on the table. I felt my stomach knot up. I looked around and I spotted it on the floor about a foot away from its original spot. I didn't hear it fall. There wasn't any chipped salt on the ground. It looked intact. My arms tingled with goosebumps. I convinced myself maybe I'd knocked it over by accident before bed. I picked it up and placed it on a bookshelf. Then I got my water and went back to bed. I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about how it moved. In the morning, I felt groggy. My neck felt stiff. My eyes burned. I went straight to the living room and I saw that sculpture sitting on the bookshelf. It seemed a bit different. The shape looked more defined, like the arms had grown longer or the shoulders were more pronounced. I thought it was just my imagination, but I got closer and noticed new grooves on its surface. They looked like shallow indentations, almost like muscles forming. I touched it with my fingertip. It felt firm, not crumbly like I expected. My throat felt tight. Part of me wanted to throw it away, but I also felt weirdly attached to it. Instead, I just left it there. I had to go to work, so I tried to push it out of my mind. At the office, I struggled to concentrate. I kept picturing that figure. My back kept tensing up whenever I remembered those indentations. During lunch, I scrolled through my phone looking for anything about salt sculptures from the sea. I didn't find much, just a bunch of art projects. I told myself I was overreacting. It was just an odd piece of salt that maybe got shaped by the tides. That evening, I got home with a knot in my stomach. I turned on the living room light, and my eyes went straight to the bookshelf. The sculpture wasn't there. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt sweat forming on my temples. I set my keys on the counter and walked toward the shelf. I saw traces of salt on the wood, like tiny flecks. I looked around the room, scanning the floor, the corners, under the table. Then I saw it near the couch. It stood upright, about a foot tall now, with more distinct features. I could see a neck, shoulders, and legs. It wasn't fully detailed, but it looked more human than before. My stomach churned. I stood there, not sure what to do. My legs felt heavy, and I noticed my hands were shaking. I picked it up carefully. It felt colder than before, and the surface felt smoother in places. I set it back on the shelf, and I felt this weird urge to keep my eyes on it. I had a sudden thought that maybe I should break it apart and throw it in the trash. But something held me back. I felt a dull ache in my chest, like anxiety building up. I tried to distract myself by turning on the TV, but my attention kept drifting back to that figure. That night, I sat in my chair across from the shelf. I didn't do much other than watch it. My heart rate would spike every time I thought I saw it move. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Around midnight, I dozed off. I woke up to the sound of a soft crack, like someone stepping on old wood. My eyes snapped open, and I saw the figure on the floor again, closer to me. I stood up too fast and got dizzy. I backed away, feeling an ache in my chest. It was taller now, maybe 1.5 feet. Its arms looked a little more natural, like they had elbows. My breathing went shallow. I reached for it, but then I pulled my hand back. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a plastic bag, and returned to the living room. I forced myself to pick the sculpture up and put it in the bag. I tied the top, took it to the hall closet, and shoved it on the top shelf. Then I slammed the door, turned off the living room light, and went to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me, even though I never do that. I felt my pulse in my ears, and my hands were clammy. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept picturing the statue in the closet. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard a thumping sound coming from the hallway. It was soft and irregular. My ears strained, and my skin felt cold. I sat up in bed, waiting. After a few minutes, it stopped. I lay back down, feeling drained. When I woke up, it was almost 9 a.m., and I was late for work. My head felt foggy. I threw on some clothes, grabbed my stuff, and rushed out the door. I didn't check the closet. All day at work, I was jumpy. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt my heart jump. I avoided small talk. When I finally got home that evening, I just stood at my front door for a minute, key in hand, not wanting to go inside. The hallway in my building smelled stale and unpleasant. I unlocked my door and stepped in. The living room was quiet. Everything looked normal at first glance. I walked over to the closet, took a breath, and opened it. The plastic bag was torn apart, shredded into strips. The sculpture was gone. I looked around the apartment. No sign of it in the living room. No sign of it in the kitchen. I opened my bathroom door slowly and peeked inside. Nothing. Then I went to my bedroom. My sheets looked undisturbed. I opened the wardrobe. Empty, except for clothes. My heart pounded. I stood in the middle of my apartment, feeling a deep tension in my chest. My shirt felt damp. I took a few steps toward the living room. Suddenly, I heard a scraping sound near the corner where my TV stand sits. I turned and saw the sculpture crouched in the corner, almost 2 feet tall now. It was shaped like a small human figure with basic outlines of a face, arms, and legs. I froze. My scalp felt tight. My lips parted, but I didn't speak. I moved closer, step by step. The figure didn't move. Its surface looked damp, like it had absorbed moisture somehow. I reached out my hand, but it felt wrong to touch it again. I decided I couldn't live with it in my home. I went to the kitchen, got a hammer, and marched back to the living room. My breath came in short gasps. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I raised the hammer, about to smash it, but then I noticed it shivering or vibrating. I pulled back, and I stood there uncertain. My mind spun. My eyes teared up out of sheer stress. I swallowed hard. I tried to steady my nerves. Then I swung the hammer down. The figure cracked in a few places and a white powder flaked off. It didn't break into pieces like I expected. It was solid, like a block of compact salt. The force jolted my arms, and I felt the vibration up to my elbows. A chunk fell off one shoulder. The rest stayed intact. My chest felt tighter. I swung again, chipping a bit more off. Then I grabbed the biggest piece and tossed it in a bucket. I scooped up the smaller pieces and did the same. I felt shaky, but also relieved, like I was finally handling it. I took the bucket to the kitchen sink. I turned on the faucet, letting water spill over the pieces of salt. They started dissolving, turning into a cloudy mixture. It felt strange to see it fade away. Some of the bigger chunks took a while to break down. I stood there rinsing everything until there were only white streaks swirling down the drain. When I finished, I turned off the water and leaned against the counter. My arms felt heavy and my throat was tight. I had a feeling in the pit of my stomach like guilt mixed with relief. I washed out the bucket until it was clean. Then I set it aside and dried my hands. My apartment was quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, I heard a few cars driving by. I walked through the living room, half expecting to see that sculpture again, but it was gone. The corner where it had been crouched was empty, just a faint powder on the floor. I wiped that up with a damp cloth. For the rest of the evening, I paced around, checking every room, every closet, and every corner. There was no sign of salt or any strange figure. I drank a large glass of water, hoping to calm down. My hands shook a little. I turned on the TV for background noise. My mind wouldn't let go of the image of that figure. It had looked so human at the end, but I forced myself to push those thoughts aside. I just wanted some normalcy. That night I slept with the lamp on. I kept the bedroom door open so I could see into the hallway. Every few hours I woke up, my heart pounding, but I didn't hear any noises. I didn't see anything moving in the dark. By morning I felt drained, but I was ready to move on. I got up, showered, and tried to pretend that the last few days had been a weird nightmare. Part of me thought about calling someone, maybe a friend, but I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone you picked up a salt statue on the beach and it started growing? I decided not to tell anyone. For days afterward, I kept expecting to see flecks of salt in the corners or on the floor, but my apartment stayed clean. I opened the windows more often, letting fresh air in. The place smelled better than it had before. I still felt uneasy sometimes, especially at night, but the sculpture never reappeared. I threw out the coffee table where I first placed it. I don't know why. I just couldn't look at that table anymore without feeling tense. I replaced it with a plain one from a discount store. I haven't been back to that beach since then. I stick to other spots when I want some fresh air. Sometimes I walk by a store window and see a statue or a mannequin, and my stomach twists for a second. But then I remind myself that it's not made of salt, and it can't move on its own. I don't have nightmares about it anymore, but the memory still hits me sometimes. I can feel the rough texture of that salt under my fingertips and see the vague human shape it took on. I don't know what it was or how it grew. All I know is that I'll never take home anything like that again. My apartment is quiet now, and I plan to keep it that way. I just want peace. That's it. I wake up with my heart pounding in my ears. My window is wide open and a strange damp patch stains the floor. There are wet footprints leading from the window to my living room. I stare at them with my chest tightening. I didn't invite anyone here last night, and my security cameras never show anything unusual. But these footprints are right in front of me. The furniture is slightly out of place. My coffee table is pushed a few inches to the left, and my couch is angled differently. I check the time on my phone. It's 6 in the morning, and I don't feel safe. I'm standing in my living room with bare feet, still in my pajamas. My shoulders feel tense, and I'm shivering even though it's not cold in here. I look around and try to remember if I moved anything before I went to sleep. I didn't. There's a faint smell in the air. It reminds me of wet concrete after a rainstorm. I follow the footprints slowly, stepping over them so I don't smear them. They go toward the kitchen, but when I reach the doorway, they stop. It's like whoever made them vanished right there. I check every camera feed from my phone. I have 4 cameras, one at the front door, one at the back door, one in the living room, and one in the hallway facing the bedrooms. I fast forward through the footage from last night. There's nothing. No motion alerts, no shape moving across the screen, nothing. It's just me turning off the lights around midnight. Then it skips ahead to early morning. I see myself walking into view right now, checking the footprints. It doesn't show the intruder or whatever it is that left those marks. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I spend the next hour cleaning the footprints and checking every lock. I lock the windows, test the doors, and flip through the camera feeds again. I'm furious and scared. My back aches because I'm tensed up. I decide to try to go about my day. I take a shower, get dressed, and drive to work. All day I can't focus. I keep thinking about those footprints. My stomach feels tight, and I'm jumpy whenever someone walks by my desk or calls my name. I leave work earlier than usual and come straight home. I don't stop for groceries or anything else. I just want to see if my house is okay. When I walk in, everything looks normal. No footprints on the floor, no open windows, no smell of dampness. I check every room, open every closet, look under all the beds. There's nothing out of the ordinary. By the time I'm done, it's nearly 8 at night. I eat a quick dinner and sit in my living room, staring at my windows. I'm not sure if I should lock all of them or keep one cracked open. Maybe if I keep one open, I can catch someone in the act. But that thought freaks me out. I'm not sure I want to face whoever is sneaking in. I decide to lock everything. I set all the cameras to record. I keep my phone in my hand and I open the security app on my TV so I can watch the live feeds. I watch them for hours, but I don't see anything. My eyelids get heavy around midnight and I start drifting off on the couch. I don't want to sleep, but my body won't let me stay awake. My head jerks forward a few times and I nearly drop my phone. At about 1 in the morning, I force myself up and stumble to my bedroom. I lock the bedroom door behind me. I don't usually do that, but tonight it feels necessary. I don't sleep well. I keep thinking I hear faint noises coming from the living room, like soft thumps or the sound of something brushing against a table. My neck is stiff from lying so rigidly in bed, afraid to move. Eventually, I drift off into an uneasy sleep. When my alarm goes off at 6, I jolt awake. My shirt is drenched in sweat, and my mouth is dry. My first thought is to check the house. I walk out of the bedroom, scanning every inch of the hallway. Nothing looks off at first. Then I pass the hallway camera. It's unplugged. The cord dangles from the outlet, but the camera is on the floor. My stomach flips. I step carefully into the living room. The window is open again, but it doesn't look forced. My blinds sway slightly in a morning breeze. There's another set of footprints, but these are smaller, and they circle around my coffee table. The table itself is moved again, about a foot away from where it was last night. My dining chair is on its side. The seat cushion is damp, like someone with wet clothes sat on it. I clench my teeth so hard my jaw hurts. I shut the window and lock it. Then I go to the camera that was unplugged and plug it back in. It powers back on, but when I check the footage, it's dead from about 2 in the morning onward. I can't see who unplugged it. It's like they knew exactly how to avoid being seen. I feel a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My thoughts race. How is this possible? Do I know someone with this kind of skill? Or is it something else? I don't have time to dwell on it too much. I have to get to work. The whole day at work I'm antsy. My boss notices I'm distracted and pulls me aside, asking if I'm okay. I just say I'm dealing with some home security issues. He doesn't pry too much, but he suggests I consider talking to the police. I've thought about it, but I don't know what I'd even tell them. There's no forced entry, no sign of theft, and the cameras show nothing. They might think I'm imagining everything. When I get home, I decide to set up a trap. I buy a cheap motion sensor alarm from a hardware store. It's the kind you can hang on a doorknob or near a window. I place it by the living room window and the hallway. I also rearrange my furniture in a very specific way, with chairs blocking doorways. If someone tries to come in, they'll either knock something over or set off an alarm. I feel a bit paranoid, but I also feel more in control. By the time I'm done setting everything up, it's late. I realize I haven't eaten dinner, so I heat up some leftovers. My appetite is small. My stomach feels tight again. I stay up watching the camera feeds until my eyes burn. I see nothing. I move from room to room, checking corners. Everything stays quiet. Around 1 in the morning, I finally let myself rest. I still lock my bedroom door, but I feel a bit better about the alarms. I manage to sleep a few hours. Then I wake up to the sound of an alarm screeching in the living room. It's so loud it feels like it's inside my skull. My heart is pounding, and I can barely think straight. I grab my phone and rush to the door, fumbling with the lock. I swing the bedroom door open and run into the hallway. The living room alarm is wailing, but the hallway sensor is silent. I flip on the light. My living room window is open. The alarm is lying on the floor and there's a dent in it, like someone smashed it with a foot. The furniture is moved again, but nothing else looks broken. I check the front door. It's still locked. The back door is locked too. My cameras show no one. It's the same story. They're on, but there's no intruder visible on the footage. I feel my hands shaking and my breath is rapid. My lungs feel tight. I silence the alarm, grab my phone, and call a locksmith. I don't care how early it is. I explain I need all my locks replaced right away. They schedule me for the afternoon. I call my boss and say I'm taking a personal day. Then I sit in my kitchen, sipping water, trying to calm down. My mind is racing with fear and frustration. Someone was here again. They set off my alarm and still managed to disappear. I walk around picking up the chairs I placed as barriers. 2 of them are turned upside down, but I can't find any sign of forced entry or exit. It's driving me nuts. A few hours later, the locksmith arrives. He changes every lock in the house, front door, back door, windows, and even the interior doors at my request. It costs a small fortune, but I want to feel secure. I also buy new cameras, ones with night vision and built-in alarms. I install them in every possible spot. By the time I'm done, the house looks like a small fortress. My hands are dirty, and I have sweat dripping down my back, but I feel a little better. I shower and decide to stay home for the rest of the day to monitor everything. Night comes. I sit on the couch with the new security feeds displayed on my TV. I watch them with the volume turned up so I can hear any motion detection beeps. It's a slow, tense wait. Around 11, I realize I'm exhausted. I make some coffee and fight to keep my eyes open. Sometime after midnight, I notice one of the cameras flicker. It's a momentary glitch. My heart jumps. I lean forward, straining to see if something happened. There's nothing on the screen, but the glitch alone is enough to raise my pulse. I stand up to check the camera physically. I walk over to where it's mounted in the hallway. It's fine, no loose wires or anything. Then I hear a soft tapping sound from behind me. My stomach clenches. I spin around and see nothing. The hallway is empty. I wait, holding my breath. I feel a bead of sweat roll down my temple. The tapping repeats. I realize it's coming from the living room. I creep forward, trying not to make noise. My palms feel clammy against the handle of my flashlight. I shine it into the living room and see the window is closed and locked, but the blinds are swaying gently like there's a breeze. There shouldn't be a breeze. Every window is supposed to be locked. I approach the blinds, reaching out slowly. My hand shakes as I grab the cord and pull them open. The window is still locked, but the glass is cracked at the edge. I can see a small fissure that wasn't there before. The tapping is the blinds bouncing against the window frame. I don't know how the glass got cracked, but it doesn't look like a bullet hole or anything like that. It's just a thin line, maybe ½ an inch long. I scan the area around the window, shining my flashlight along the sill. There's nothing unusual, just a slight wet smear on the inside of the frame. It looks fresh, like someone touched it with a damp cloth. My stomach churns. I check my phone to see if I missed any motion alert. Nothing. The cameras are still showing an empty living room. I turn off the flashlight and go back to the hallway. My legs feel stiff, and my heart is still racing. I don't know what to do. I move from camera to camera, checking them in person, making sure they're still plugged in. They are. I watch the feeds from my phone as I walk around, verifying that I'm visible on the screen. I am. It's streaming. There's no glitch except for that brief flicker earlier. I stay awake until dawn. The sun rises and I check every inch of the house again. No new footprints on the floor, no major furniture shifts. Just that small crack in the window and that wet smear. I open the windows to let in some fresh air, hoping maybe I'm imagining the smell of dampness. But the smell is still there, subtle but persistent. It's like someone tracked in water from a puddle outside. At this point, I decide to contact the police. Even if they can't see anything on the cameras, maybe they'll have some ideas. An officer shows up in the afternoon, and I show him the footprints I photographed, the damaged alarm, and the crack in the window. He looks around, takes notes, and eventually tells me they can't do much without a suspect or a clear sign of a break-in. He suggests I keep my cameras rolling, maybe install a better security system if I feel unsafe. I try to show him the wet footprints on my phone, but he just says they could be anything. He leaves with a polite smile, telling me to call if anything else happens. I feel frustrated and alone. I order more motion sensors, more cameras, and even a backup generator in case someone tries to cut the power. I think about staying at a friend's place, but a part of me wants to be here if it happens again. I need to catch whoever or whatever is doing this. I can't stand feeling so helpless. I sleep on the couch that night, wanting to be in the middle of the house, ready to jump up if I hear anything. At around 3 in the morning, I jolt awake to the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. My heart is pounding instantly. I reach for my phone and turn on the camera feed. It shows my living room from 2 different angles. Both angles look normal, except I hear that dragging sound again. I throw off my blanket and stand, shining my flashlight around. The sound stops. I check behind the couch, under the table, in the kitchen. Nothing. Everything is in its place. I walk into the hallway, shining my light. The hallway looks the same as always, except the camera in there is slightly tilted, like someone touched it. I straighten it. My hands are shaking so hard I nearly drop it. I spend the rest of the night just pacing around. My nerves are shot. My eyes burn from lack of sleep. Every small creak makes my heart race. By the time the sun comes up, I've inspected the entire place at least 5 times. I don't see any new evidence. No wet footprints, no open windows, no moved furniture. But I know I heard something. I know it wasn't my imagination. I don't know how long I can keep living like this. I feel like a prisoner in my own home. But I'm determined to find out who's breaking in. I'm determined to see them with my own eyes. Part of me is terrified of what I'll see when that finally happens, but I'm too stubborn to leave. For now, I'm going to install these extra sensors and hope that something shows up on the footage. I might not have answers yet, but I'm not running away. Someone is coming into my house at night, and I'm going to catch them no matter how long it takes. The first time I heard that soft exhale behind my neck, I froze in place. My flashlight shook in my hand, and I thought my radio was about to slip from my belt. I'd worked security for almost 8 years and never once felt that kind of chill. I'd seen prowlers and I'd chased vandals out of locked sites. I never backed down from any confrontation, but that gentle breath made my skin tingle in a way I couldn't explain. It felt close, like a person was standing right behind me. I turned around fast, shining my light over the crates and pallets. I saw nothing. The air smelled like dust and rusted metal, which was normal in that old warehouse. I told myself it was just a draft. I felt foolish for jumping at a breeze. I shook it off and kept walking. I was there for the night shift. My job was to walk through the entire facility, check the doors, make sure no one sneaked in, and respond to any alerts. The warehouse was massive, with long corridors and tall shelves stacked with metal parts. Some corners were dark even when I aimed my flashlight right at them. It was the kind of place that echoed every step, every cough, every shift of machinery. When I moved, I heard my boots on the floor and the quiet hum of distant ventilation fans. That night, I followed my regular route and stopped at each checkpoint. I scanned the corners, tested the door locks, and noted any unusual sounds. I didn't see any broken windows or suspicious signs, at least not at first. The entire place seemed quiet except for the soft buzz from overhead lights and the occasional click from cooling metal beams. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about that breath. I tried to ignore it. I circled back to my little office near the front entrance. I grabbed a quick sip of water from the cooler, then I stretched my arms. My shift was barely halfway done. I had hours to go. I checked the cameras, flipping through different angles. Nothing weird showed up on the monitors. I told myself I was imagining things. I got up, patted my pockets to make sure I had my keys, flashlight, and phone, then went back out. I walked along the main aisle, shining my light into each row. Everything looked normal. Then I felt that breath again. It brushed against my neck, as if someone released a small puff of air right behind me. My throat went dry so fast it felt like I'd swallowed sand. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I tried to say something like, "Who's there?" But my voice was gone. My tongue felt numb. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I fumbled for my radio, but I couldn't talk anyway, so I didn't even bother pressing the button. My heart hammered in my chest, and I clutched the flashlight tighter. I spun around again, scanning the area. No one was there. The shelves were still. The lights were dim. I saw no movements in the shadows. After a few seconds, my voice returned. I tested it by clearing my throat. It came back scratchy, but at least I could speak again. I stepped forward, shining the beam along the rows. I didn't see any footprints or signs of an intruder. I took a steady breath and told myself to keep moving. My boots thumped on the concrete. I heard the faint echo of each step. Every few yards, I looked over my shoulder. Nothing followed me, at least nothing I could see. I moved deeper into the west wing where the heavy machinery was stored. The crates were bigger there and the corridors were narrower. My flashlight glinted off metal edges and the floor was mostly covered in dust. I saw a few scattered footprints from workers who might have been there during the day, but they looked normal. They were the shapes of work boots pressed into a layer of dust. I kept my eyes on them, but nothing about those tracks stood out. That weird breath stayed on my mind. A little while later, I reached the far corner, near a series of sealed doors. One door led to a room with old pipes and broken machinery. It was always locked, and I almost never went inside because they stored junk there. I turned the doorknob to confirm it was secure. It wouldn't budge. The padlock was in place. I moved on. Right around that time, I felt the breath again. My neck prickled. The hair on my arm stood up. This time the exhale felt colder, like a sudden draft. My throat clenched, and I tried to call out on the radio. Nothing happened. I couldn't form a single word. I forced myself to swallow. My lips parted. My heart rate soared. Still no voice. I whipped around, shining the beam in every direction. I saw the glint of metal and the gray walls. My breath came out in heavy pants. I could feel my palms sweating on the flashlight's grip. For a few seconds, I stood there, mute. I forced a cough. Finally, a thin rasp came out. I pressed the radio button and managed to say, "Control, do you copy?" There was a hiss of static, then a normal reply. My supervisor's voice came back, sounding half asleep. He asked if everything was okay. I told him I heard something weird, but I was fine. I wanted to say more, but I was worried I'd sound paranoid, so I just said I'd do another sweep. He told me to keep him updated. I let go of the button and started walking again. My next stop was the storage yard behind the main building. The yard had a concrete floor, exposed to the outside air but surrounded by tall walls and a closed gate. I stepped through the big sliding door, feeling the cold night breeze. I checked the padlock on the gate and made sure it was intact. I aimed my flashlight over the concrete, just to see if there was any unusual sign of trespassing. That's when I saw something that made me pause. A line of footprints crossed the floor. They were spaced like a person's footsteps, but each one looked like it had partially melted into the concrete. The edges were rough and cracked. There was no way a regular boot or shoe could do that. The center of each print went deeper than the rest, as if the concrete softened under intense heat. The footprints weren't fresh in the sense of wet cement, but they looked like they'd been created by something that radiated enough heat to deform the ground. I crouched down and ran my hand along the edge of one print. The surface felt solid, but the shape was sunken and irregular. It wasn't dust or paint. It was an actual indentation. My stomach tightened. I glanced around the yard, shining the light toward every corner. The air smelled like cold metal and old fuel. I didn't see any movement. The gate was still locked. There was no sign of forced entry. Those footprints had to come from inside. I checked the direction they led. They stopped near the edge of the loading dock and didn't go any farther, at least not in a visible pattern. I stepped on that final print, feeling the rough texture under my boot. It sent a slight shiver up my leg. I felt like I was trespassing in someone else's domain, but this was my post, so I kept telling myself to stay calm. I raised my radio again. "Control, I found something strange in the backyard," I said, breathing faster than I wanted to admit. "Footprints in the concrete, they look melted." I waited for a response. Static crackled, then my supervisor's voice said he'd never heard of anything like that. He sounded confused. He asked if I wanted him to send someone over. My voice shook a little when I replied that I'd keep looking around. I tried to push aside the feeling of dread. I followed the footprints backward, hoping to see where they started. My flashlight revealed the first melted print near a big storage container. It continued through the yard and ended at that loading dock. In total, there were about 10 prints. I climbed the short steps to the dock and opened the door to the warehouse interior. The footprints didn't continue on the other side. I stood in the darkness, scanning the floor inside. Nothing. I got an uneasy feeling. Where did whatever made those prints go? I heard the breath again. This time it was cooler, almost icy, and my entire neck seized up. My airway felt like it was constricting. I tried to shout, but all I managed was a weak gasp. My throat felt painfully tight. My eyes watered, and I fought for breath. My radio was in my hand, but I couldn't speak. I stumbled against a metal crate, steadying myself. My knees felt shaky. I forced myself to breathe through my nose. After a few seconds, my voice came back in a hoarse cough. I pressed the radio button, but I didn't say anything. I just inhaled, trying to clear my head. My heart pounded hard, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead. I stepped inside the warehouse and closed the door behind me. The echo of the metal door sliding shut made me jump. I was done pretending this was just a breeze or a trick of my mind. Something was happening. I walked along the next corridor, scanning every inch of the place. The overhead lights hummed. Each step felt heavy and tense. I could feel the dryness in my mouth. I tightened my jaw, trying to stay focused. My job was to secure the building. I thought about calling my supervisor again and telling him to send backup, but I also hated the idea of looking scared. I reminded myself that I'd handled strange situations before, but none of those involved losing my voice or melted footprints. The breath came once more, near my left ear. It sounded like a slow exhale. My throat seized up again, but this time I forced out a whisper. It hurt, like my vocal cords were being squeezed. I felt cold sweat rolling down my temple. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught a glimpse of movement near the far end of the corridor. I saw a shadow slip behind a tall rack. I ran after it, shining my light ahead, but when I got there, I saw nothing. The space was empty. I only heard a gentle click from a distant pipe. The air was stale. I decided I couldn't handle this alone. I pressed the radio button. "Control, I need assistance," I said, my voice cracking. "Something is in here. I paused, feeling my throat tighten again. I forced the words out. "I don't know what it is." My supervisor asked if I was sure. I told him about the footprints and the cold breath, leaving out how my voice kept disappearing. He said he'd send someone over to help me check the building. I felt a surge of relief. I waited by the main entrance for a while, pacing back and forth. I pointed my flashlight at every corner. My chest felt tight and my mouth felt dry no matter how often I swallowed. My supervisor radioed me back, saying he'd called a coworker who lived nearby. That coworker would arrive in about 20 minutes. I stood there tapping my foot. The overhead lights flickered once. Then I heard the same breath, but it was louder. It made the hairs on my neck stand up again. I tried to shout, but only a hoarse croak came out. My radio slipped out of my hand and hit the floor. My throat felt like it was coated in dust. My eyes watered. I bent down, fumbling for the radio, and looked around wildly. I saw the open corridor leading into the deeper part of the warehouse. I shined my flashlight down that way. Nothing moved. The hum of the lights was the only sound. Finally, my vocal cords loosened. I took a gulp of air. My mind raced. I thought about running outside and waiting for backup there, but a part of me wanted to stand my ground. This was my post. I wasn't going to let something chase me off. I forced myself to walk down that corridor, one slow step at a time. I gripped the flashlight like a weapon. My breath sounded ragged in my ears. My palms were sweaty. The lights above me flickered again. I stopped for a second, straining to hear anything out of place. I picked up the slight echo of metal shifting. but it wasn't coming from one spot. It sounded like it traveled along the walls. My heart pounded. My legs felt heavy. I stepped closer to a row of crates. I heard that breath again, but it was right behind me. My voice cut out instantly. My tongue felt numb. I spun around, shining the beam across the empty walkway. No figure, no movement, just the stale air and those tall shelves. I stumbled back a few steps. My throat was locked up. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might burst. I forced my mouth open, trying to scream. Nothing came out but a rasp. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a faint shape near the end of the aisle. It looked like a slight distortion, as if the air was bending. I froze, focusing my flashlight on it. I didn't see a solid form, just a shiver in the air. Then it disappeared around the corner. I didn't chase it. I couldn't. My legs refused to move. I stayed there, shaking, until my co-worker arrived. He found me with my flashlight on the floor and my radio clutched in my hand. I didn't hear him come in. I almost jumped out of my skin when he tapped my shoulder. He asked if I was okay, and I took a few seconds to make my voice work. I told him about the footprints in the yard. I told him about the breath on my neck. I told him my throat kept freezing. He stared at me like he wasn't sure if I was serious, but he believed I saw something. We went to the yard together, but the footprints were still there. He shined his own flashlight on them and shook his head. We didn't talk much about it. We just locked everything up tight and waited for the end of the shift. I don't know what caused those footprints, and I don't know what made that cold breath appear behind me. I just know it challenged every idea I had about fear. I learned that night that no matter how tough I thought I was, there's always something out there that can turn my voice to ash. And whenever I think about that job now, I still feel a chill on my neck, like a silent reminder that I wasn't as fearless as I claimed to be. I moved into that apartment hoping I could forget everything about my old life. I wanted silence, a place where I could unpack my boxes, get new furniture, and not think about the divorce. But the first night I slept there, I woke up around 3 a.m. with the sound of muffled voices. They drifted through the walls, slow and drawn out, like low chatter in the next room. At first, I thought it might be the neighbors. It was an old building in the center of town, and the walls felt thin. But there was something off about the way these voices rose and fell. They didn't sound like typical conversations. They sounded disjointed, sometimes repeating the same words in loops. I sat up in bed, listening, trying to make out phrases. I remember holding my breath at one point, certain I heard my name. It gave me a chill, but I convinced myself I was just tired. I tried to tell myself it was a dream or my imagination. The next morning, I checked the hallway to see if anyone else had heard anything. There was a narrow corridor leading to the elevator. It had yellowish lighting and peeling wallpaper. I knocked on the door of the apartment next to mine, hoping to ask if they had any idea about the noise. No one answered. I hovered there for a moment, feeling uneasy. Then I went back inside and looked around my own place. I only had a few boxes stacked near the door. The living room was mostly empty, just a couch I got from a thrift store and a small coffee table. The kitchen had outdated cabinets and a gas stove that made ticking sounds before it lit. There were scuff marks on the floor that I hadn't noticed when I signed the lease. My bedroom had a single mattress and a lamp on the floor. Everything felt plain, but it was mine. I tried to settle in. I spent the afternoon unpacking a few things, like my clothes and some plates. While I set up the coffee machine, I noticed how quiet the apartment seemed during the day. It made me doubt what I heard the night before. Maybe old buildings make all sorts of noises at night. Pipes rattle, water drips. People talk in the stairwell. I figured I'd get used to it. After lunch, I decided to explore the rest of the building. The hallway outside looked dim. Some of the lights on the ceiling flickered. The elevator smelled like old metal and had an actual grate you had to pull shut before pressing the button. The walls inside had rust-colored stains. I went down to the lobby and saw an elderly man behind a small desk. He barely glanced at me. I told him I'd just moved in and asked if there were any known problems with the building. He shrugged and said something about the plumbing. He didn't mention anything about voices. That night, I lay on the couch flipping through channels on a small TV. I felt tired from all the unpacking, so I dozed off around 10 p.m. I woke up to that same murmuring sound. The clock on the wall said 2:27 a.m. This time, the voices seemed closer. I got up, stepped across the living room, and placed my ear against the wall. I heard that strange echo of words, but I couldn't pinpoint what they were saying. I moved from one wall to another, trying to track it. Each time I pressed my ear against the plaster, I thought I heard something different. Sometimes it sounded like quiet laughter, other times like someone sobbing. My heart thumped in my chest. My palms were sweating. A strange tension spread through my body, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I stood in the middle of the living room for a while, just listening. The voices faded. Eventually, there was silence. My heart was still racing, though. I looked around, feeling confused. The apartment seemed normal under the glow of the lamp. Everything was still. But something about that silence felt heavy. I was awake for another hour, pacing around, waiting for the murmurs to start again. They didn't. I finally went back to the couch and tried to sleep. It was a restless night. By the third night, I started to notice patterns. The voices never came before midnight. They always crept in after I'd been asleep for a bit. I found myself waiting for them, lying in bed with my eyes on the ceiling, feeling my pulse in my neck. Around 2 a.m., I heard that quiet chatter. I forced myself to breathe evenly and sit up. My mouth went dry. The sound drifted through the walls, shifting from one side of the room to the other. I was sure I heard my name again, but I couldn't tell which voice was saying it. I walked to the living room and stood by the wall that separated my apartment from the neighboring unit. I pressed my ear to it. The voices sounded like they were coming from inside my apartment, not next door. My stomach twisted. I stepped back and looked around. The couch, the coffee table, the boxes, everything was in place. I turned on every light in the apartment, trying to chase away the tension. When morning came, I felt drained. I had dark circles under my eyes. I tried to keep busy, so I went out to buy more groceries and a small bookshelf. I talked to the guy at the hardware store, asked him about older buildings and sound insulation, but he gave me a vague answer about how some old walls carry noise. I headed back, spent most of the day assembling the bookshelf and cleaning the kitchen. I avoided napping because I was worried about staying up too late. By the time night fell, I was on edge. Every little sound made me jump. The refrigerator hum seemed too loud. The pipes in the bathroom clanged. Around 10 p.m., I turned off the TV, brushed my teeth, and got into bed. I tried to convince myself it was just normal noise, but my gut told me something else was going on. I woke up a few hours later to a loud thump in the hallway. I shot out of bed, my heart hammering. I opened my bedroom door and flicked on the light. The hallway was empty, but I still heard soft whispers seeping out from the walls. It sounded like a group of people mumbling my name, along with fragments of personal details. I caught the words, divorce, lawyer, and signed. It felt like someone was reading the memories I wanted to bury. My throat tightened. Sweat trickled down my forehead. I felt a cold rush of fear in my chest, like ice pressing against my ribs. I moved closer to the wall. My hands trembled as I touched the plaster. The texture felt normal under my fingertips, but I sensed something behind it, like a slow vibration. It made the hair on my arms stand up. The voices intensified for a moment, then stopped. I stood in silence, focusing on the rush of blood in my ears. A few seconds later, a single voice returned. It repeated my name, then said something I didn't fully catch, but it sounded like it was referencing my past. I couldn't stay calm. I started banging on the wall with my fist, yelling for whoever was behind it to leave me alone. The wall thudded under my punches. I heard the hollow echo of my own strikes. There was no response. No footsteps, no real movement, just that sudden nothingness. My knuckles were sore by then. I went to the kitchen, gulped some water, and leaned against the counter. My breathing was ragged. My mind felt foggy. I wanted to run out of the apartment, but I didn't want to look like a lunatic wandering the halls in the middle of the night. After a few minutes, I forced myself back to bed. I lay there, staring at the ceiling. My arms felt tense, and I couldn't stop clenching my jaw. I listened for any more noises, but heard only my own heartbeat. Eventually, I dozed off. In the morning, I tried to act normal. I made coffee, checked my phone, and glanced at the local news. My ex-wife's name flashed through my thoughts, and I shoved it out of my mind. I looked at the walls in the daylight, but they just looked like old plaster. No cracks, no sign of anything unusual. I headed out to run some errands. I stopped by a hardware store again and picked up a small hammer, more nails, and some filler. On the walk back, I thought about telling someone about the voices, but I didn't know who. I had no close friends in this new city. I wasn't on great terms with my family. The landlord didn't seem approachable, and I doubted the old man in the lobby would be much help. That night, I decided I wasn't going to hide in my room. I set up a chair in the living room, right by the wall. I had a lamp on, plus the overhead light. I placed my phone on the coffee table to record any sounds. I wanted proof, or at least some clarity. Around 1:45 a.m., the voices started again. They began as soft chatter, then grew louder. I felt my stomach tighten. My chest rose and fell with each anxious breath. I could feel my shirt sticking to my back from sweat. I sat there listening. The recording app on my phone showed a sound wave, but I couldn't make out if it was capturing the actual whispers or just my own tense breathing. The voices shifted from random murmurs to sharper, clearer words. It was like they were speaking directly to me. They mentioned events from my life. They brought up the day I signed the divorce papers, details about arguments I had in my old house, and even the color of the couch I used to own with my ex. My temples pounded. My vision blurred for a second because I felt my pulse hammering in my head. The voices turned into the exact tones of people I knew, not just my ex-wife, but old friends, co-workers, and my parents. It was like they were all behind the wall, discussing me. I couldn't just sit there. My mind raced. I grabbed the hammer I'd bought earlier. I stood up and faced the wall. My heart thumped so loud I could feel it in my throat. I lifted the hammer and struck the wall. Bits of plaster flew off. A small cloud of dust rose up. The sound of the hammer hitting the wall echoed around the apartment. The voices got louder, like they were in pain, or maybe in anger. I couldn't tell. My arms trembled, but I kept hitting the wall. I just wanted them to stop. Every hit made a hollow, booming sound. The plaster cracked. I swung the hammer again and again, until I created a hole about the size of my fist. Dust and pieces of drywall fell to the floor. Then I moved my face closer to the hole. I shined my phone's flashlight into it. My breath caught in my throat. There was no insulation, no brick, no pipes. It was just blackness. Not the kind you see in a normal void behind a wall, but a deep, empty space that seemed to stretch in every direction. It felt like looking into a bottomless pit. The air from inside felt cool and strange against my face. I struggled to breathe. My lungs felt tight. I pushed my phone a little closer to the opening, but the light didn't reveal anything but that infinite darkness. I heard a rustling from inside the wall. It sounded like movement. My entire body tensed. The whispers rose up again, louder than before, echoing from that endless space. They called my name in overlapping voices, some familiar, some not. My muscles felt weak, and I gripped the hammer with sweaty hands. I took a step back, trying to steady myself. My legs felt shaky, like they could buckle at any moment. I stood there, heart pounding, eyes locked on the hole. Dust coated my tongue and my nose stung. I felt the dryness in my throat as I swallowed. The voices kept calling to me, repeating fragments of my own memories, dredging up old conversations. I remembered fights, regrets, and small embarrassments I'd tried to forget. They were all thrown in my face. I tried to calm myself, but my entire body was on alert. My hands shook and my breath came in short bursts. I picked up a flashlight from a kitchen drawer. It was the kind with a strong beam. I pointed it through the hole. The beam vanished into that black void like it was swallowed up. I couldn't see a back wall or any kind of boundary. There was just emptiness in those voices. I felt a chill spreading over my skin. My mind raced with questions. Did the entire building have this endless space behind the walls? Was I imagining it? I gritted my teeth and tried to think clearly, but my pulse pounded so hard I could barely focus. The voices were relentless. They rose and fell, sometimes overlapping, sometimes stopping abruptly. My name came up again and again. They repeated personal details I hadn't told anyone in this city. My mouth felt dry and I let out a shaky exhale. My eyes burned from staring into that dark opening. I pulled back, dropping my flashlight onto the floor. My chest felt tight and I realized I was breathing too fast. I clutched my sides, trying to steady myself, but my legs refused to feel solid. I knew I couldn't stay there all night. My mind felt like it was spinning. I bent down, picked up the flashlight, and glanced at the hole one last time. The voices were still there, echoing out of that blackness. I thought about boarding up the hole, but I knew it wouldn't stop the sounds. The apartment felt too small, like the walls were closing in. My skin tingled with a cold sweat. I walked backward toward the door, keeping my eyes on the opening. When I reached the exit, I fumbled with the lock, yanked the door open, and stepped out into the hallway. The hallway lights flickered. It was silent out there. The door to my apartment stood open behind me, and I still heard faint whispers creeping out. My chest felt heavy, and my limbs shook. I didn't know if I should leave for good or call someone. I stared at the worn carpet and tried to steady my breath. I felt a numbness in my fingers. I stayed like that for a few minutes, unable to make a decision. My thoughts were jumbled. Everything felt unreal. Finally, I stepped back into the apartment and slammed the door. The voices were lower now, like they were waiting. I could hear them in the distance, but they no longer seemed furious. I slid down against the wall, the hammer resting in my lap. My pulse still hammered in my ears. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the broken plaster and that black hole. The air from it felt cool against my skin. I couldn't stop shaking. I felt trapped. The city outside was quiet. The old building creaked. The voices murmured, and I braced myself every time I heard my own name. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, I stood up, turned off my phone's flashlight, and walked slowly to the bedroom. The voices continued in that low drone. They never let me relax. My body ached. My throat felt raw. The black void behind the wall seemed to breathe in and out with each echo. I lay on the bed, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness of my room. My breath was shallow, and my thoughts raced. I didn't know if I'd ever find real silence again. All I could do was listen to the whispers that were supposed to be impossible. They belonged to something hidden in the walls, something that knew too much about me, and they weren't going to let me forget. I've never liked quiet streets at 3 a.m. My name's Matt, retired cop, 62 years old, insomniac for the last 2 decades. I walk around at night because lying in bed makes me feel trapped. I need to move. I need to see what's out there in the dark. Usually it's just empty sidewalks, parked cars, and the occasional stray cat. But tonight, something about the streetlights is off. They glare down in a way I've never noticed before, stretching my shadow across the concrete like an oil stain. It looks longer than usual, like it's reaching for something. And when I turn to check my footing, it seems to peel away from me for a second before snapping back into place. I feel a tightness in my chest as I step onto the corner. I look up and down the street, expecting to see nothing but rows of old buildings and shuttered storefronts. That's mostly true, but I notice that my shadow is not a single outline. It's got layers, almost like multiple outlines stacked on top of each other. My heart speeds up, and I stand there trying to calm myself. I focus on the sound of my sneakers scraping the sidewalk. I hear the distant hum of a generator behind one of the stores. I see a flickering neon sign above a tiny diner, closed for the night. Everything seems normal except for that multi-layered shadow at my feet. I shift my weight from one leg to the other. My shadow moves, but it looks like part of it lags behind, almost half a second late. It's subtle, but it's enough to make my hair stand on end. I keep moving forward, thinking that maybe I'm just seeing things. I've been sleepless for the past few nights, and I wonder if my eyes are playing tricks on me. My mind feels foggy sometimes. But I walk another block, and at each street lamp I catch a glimpse of those extra outlines trailing my real shadow. They're faint, like smudges, but they're there. The night air is cold. My breath comes out in short bursts. I usually pay attention to the temperature because it affects how my joints feel. Arthritis set in a few years ago, so I keep a steady pace, careful not to strain my knees. I hear the soft crunch of gravel under my soles when I cut through an alley. The alley is narrow and it reeks of rotting trash. I see a knocked-over trash can and a small puddle that smells awful. I try not to step in it. The single overhead light buzzes. Then I catch movement on the wall, my shadow, flickering, shifting in a way that doesn't match my posture. I freeze, pressing my back against the brick wall. My heart pounds like it used to when I was on the force, about to enter a hostile situation. I look at my shadow directly, and it's just my outline. I tilt my head and it tilts too, but then from the corner of my vision I see something stretch out behind me. It's like a limb, a long black arm that extends near my foot. I jerk my head around, but the second I look at it fully, it's gone. I'm alone again, with just a single shadow on the ground. My pulse is racing. My mouth feels dry. I can't ignore what I saw. I decide to leave the alley. The streets are safer, with more lampposts and maybe some passing cars. I walk faster than usual. My breath is shallow, my eyes darting between storefronts and closed bars. An empty bench sits near a bus stop. I slow down to sit for a second, hoping to catch my breath. The bench is cold, but I welcome the sensation. It keeps me alert. I rub my eyes and glance at my own feet. My shadow is directly under the streetlight, and it looks normal at first. Then I see another shape flicker behind it, like a face peering out. I swear I see two black eye sockets looking back at me. I shoot up from the bench, turning around. Nothing's there. My spine feels tight, and my hands start shaking. I feel a slight tremor in my left hand that reminds me of the old days when I had to corner a suspect in an abandoned building. It's that same tension in my body, telling me something's not right. I start walking again, determined to stay on well-lit roads. I pass by a hardware store with its lights off. The window reflects the street lamp behind me. I glance at that reflection, trying to see if there's anything unusual about my form. For a second, it looks normal. Then a movement behind me in the reflection makes me spin around. I stare at the spot where I thought I saw something, but the sidewalk is empty. I keep going, ignoring the thump in my chest. About 2 blocks down, there's a long row of storefront windows, all dark because it's the middle of the night. I catch my reflection in each window as I pass. I see my shoulders, my coat, my hat, my tired eyes. My shadow follows me, but now there's a moment when I step away from the glass and notice something. In the last window, I see my reflection, but I don't see any dark shape behind it. My shadow is missing in that reflection. The glass is clean, but I only see my body, not the outline I expect on the ground. I stop and stare. I move my arms up and down, watching my reflection do the same, but there's no shadow behind me in that window. My throat goes dry. My head feels light, and I have to place a hand on the cold metal frame for balance. I sense a pressure in the air, like the atmosphere is heavier than normal. I'm sweating even though the temperature hasn't changed. I turn around, expecting to see my shadow on the sidewalk. I don't see it. The streetlight is behind me, so I should see a shadow stretching out in front of me. But the pavement is empty. There's no outline. That tightness in my chest returns, and my hands go clammy. I start to think maybe I'm losing it. Maybe my insomnia is so bad that I'm hallucinating. But I can't ignore how real this feels. I spin around, trying to catch sight of any shape that might be mine. Then a brief flicker from the corner of the building draws my attention. It's like a ripple of black passing along the wall, fast and smooth. I feel a chill in my arms. The hair on the back of my neck stands up. I take a step back, almost stumbling off the curb. My heart thunders in my ears. I hear a faint scraping sound behind a dumpster near the alley. I approach it carefully, my mind going back to old training. I keep my center of gravity steady. My mouth is dry, and I can feel each breath in my throat. I edge toward the dumpster, listening for any more sounds. It's quiet except for my own heartbeat. Then I see a shape slide across the wall, dark and fluid, like a person's outline bending around the corner. But there's no person there. I jerk back. My shoulder blades press against the cold brick behind me. I catch a glimpse of a face in the reflection on a nearby metal door. It's not my face. It's a dark shape with hollows where the eyes should be. I lunge away, almost losing my balance. When I look directly at the door, it's just my own reflection again. My pulse is hammering so hard that I can feel it in my neck. My teeth clench. My legs feel shaky, but I can't stay here. I move down the sidewalk, keeping my eyes on the ground. I try to look at my own shadow again, but it's still missing. The overhead lights are shining, but I have no outline. My stomach churns. I keep swallowing, but my mouth stays dry. My mind runs 100 miles an hour, thinking about what could cause this. I know there's no logical reason for someone to lose their shadow. I don't believe in superstition or anything like that, but I can't deny what I see. As I pass by another store, I notice the glass door. I pause to check my reflection. I see my reflection's body, but there's no dark outline behind me. It's like I'm just floating there. I suddenly feel something behind me, a presence or a small shift in the air. I don't want to turn around, but my instincts tell me to check. I spin around, my hand instinctively going to where my old service weapon used to be. But I'm not carrying a gun anymore. I'm retired. I see a flicker in the corner of my vision. I try to track it, but it's fast, slipping along the edges of the light. My heart is racing so fast it hurts. My chest muscles feel tight. I let out a shaky breath and force myself to take another step forward. Every lamp I pass, I look down, hoping to see my normal shadow under me. It never appears. Each time I move, the darkness around me seems to quiver, like it's forming shapes when I'm not looking. Then I hear a dull thump from the alley up ahead. I stop, not sure if I want to investigate, but old habits die hard. I step forward, staying close to the wall. The alley is dim, lit by a single flickering bulb. I see a dumpster, some trash bags, a few broken pallets. And I see something shifting near the far corner. It's a dark patch on the ground shaped like a human outline, but twisted. It's not attached to any person. It's just there, moving by itself like a living stain. I feel my throat tighten. My whole body tenses. I force myself to inch closer, one step at a time. My heart's pounding so loud I can barely hear anything else. I see that the shadow is layered, like multiple outlines shifting over each other. It's the same effect I noticed at the start of the night. I'm certain now that this is my shadow. It's just not staying with me. It's detached. It turns its head, if you can call that shape a head, in my direction. My stomach lurches. I grip the corner of the brick wall, my knuckles turning white. For a split second, I lock eyes with it, or at least I think I do. Then it slides back behind the dumpster like a liquid, disappearing from sight. I hear a faint scraping, and that's it. My legs feel weak, I can hardly stand. I know I should run. I know I should get out of here and hide in my apartment until sunrise. But I'm frozen, leaning against the wall, panting like I just ran a mile. Eventually, I back away from the alley, never taking my eyes off the spot where the shape vanished. I stumble onto the sidewalk and nearly trip over my own feet. My mind is spinning. I wipe cold sweat off my forehead. The city is still dead quiet, except for the hum of streetlights. I glance down one last time to see if my shadow is back. It isn't. The sidewalk is empty under me, and that unnerves me more than I can put into words. It's like losing a part of myself. I hurry along the block, keeping my focus on reaching an intersection I know has brighter lights. My legs feel stiff and my mouth stays dry. At the intersection, the lamps are bright, and I look around, hoping to see my normal shadow again, but nothing's there. I feel a breeze on my neck and I tense up. I spin around, half expecting to see that shape behind me, but the street is empty. No cars, no people, no movement. Just me, standing there with no shadow. I can't take this much longer. I start to jog, ignoring the aches in my knees. I tell myself I need to reach somewhere familiar, somewhere well lit. I pass another row of closed shops. Their windows reflect my image, showing me as an older man, sweat on my face, eyes wide, arms pumping at my sides. But there's no shadow following me in any reflection. It's like I'm some sort of hollow figure. Every time I think about it, my pulse surges and my breathing gets heavier. I'm not sure if I'm losing my mind or if something truly impossible is happening. I only know that I'm afraid. My hands feel ice cold despite the heat building in my chest. I feel a prickle on the back of my neck again, and I can't help looking behind me every few steps. I keep expecting to see that black shape creeping along the buildings, but I see nothing. I finally reach a lit parking lot next to an all-night convenience store. There's a security camera on a pole near the entrance. I think about going inside, but I'm too worked up to talk to anyone. Instead, I stand in the middle of the lot, under the brightest floodlight I can find. I look down. Still no shadow. The asphalt is empty around my feet. My body starts shaking. I can't stop it. I realize I'm panting and my throat feels raw. My mind races and I try to steady myself by staring at the convenience store sign. It's bright blue and white, buzzing slightly. I look at the glass door. My reflection is there, smaller now because of the distance. I see my jacket and my loose pants, but I see no outline behind me. I stand there, frozen in place, too scared to move. Then I hear the faintest sound of something sliding across the asphalt behind me. I whip around. For a fraction of a second, I catch a glimpse of a dark shape darting behind a parked car. My stomach flips. My teeth clench. I realize I can't do this anymore. My body is exhausted and my brain feels like it's on fire. I gather what little courage I have left and walk toward the store. The automatic doors hiss open. I step inside, blinking at the fluorescent lights. A bored-looking clerk glances at me, then goes back to checking something on his phone. I shuffle to the back of the store where the freezers are. It's cold, and the overhead lighting is harsh. The floor is white tile. I glance at my feet again, expecting to see at least some outline. There's nothing. My legs feel ready to give out. I lean against the cooler door for a moment, struggling to breathe normally. My eyes dart around, watching for any sign of movement. The store is empty except for me and the clerk. I try to calm myself by thinking about how bright it is in here. Surely nothing weird can happen under these lights. But I still feel that awful tension in my chest, like at any second I might see that shape creeping along the floor. I can't stay here forever. I don't know what's happening or how to fix it. All I know is that I feel hunted by something I can't directly see. Maybe it's just in my head. Maybe I've finally snapped after all these sleepless nights, but I know I'm not imagining everything. I saw that shape move on its own. I saw that face. My shadow is gone, and that thing is out there somewhere, crawling around the edges of the light. I push myself off the cooler door and walk back toward the exit. The clerk gives me a quick look but doesn't say anything. As the automatic doors slide open, I step out into the night, not sure if I should head home or keep walking. The cool air hits my face and I pause to look around. The parking lot is still. The sky is clear. The city lights glow in the distance. But there's an emptiness below me on the pavement. I have no idea how to escape a darkness that refuses to stay connected to me. And as I stand there, I sense movement behind me again. I don't look. I just keep my eyes on the asphalt, bracing myself for whatever comes next.